415. The emperor of the Gao family of the Great Sui attended the Feast of Thousand Old Men. The Great Li's envoy was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites who visited Longquan County that year. If Chen Pinggan saw him, he would definitely recognize him at a glance. At the banquet, which was full of gray-haired people, Song Jisin and Shu Ruo sat on either side of Dallas Minister. They both used aliases. Ji Qiu did not show up. Shu Ruo was still dressed as a paladin with a sword behind her back. Except for the young embroidered tiger, no one knew how big of a deal Shu Ruo had done. She directly faced Mr. Fan and promised one of the branches of the Song clan that the Shang clan could intervene in the grand banquet that swept across the whole continent. The Song clan would not interfere in the grand banquet for the next 30 years. Shu Ruo drank wine. She was not thinking about these big events. Instead, she was thinking about how to cultivate Dong Shuijing, who still bought wontons every day, into a real person who could buy them on credit. Song Jisin looked at the Great Sui Kingdom's emperor and then looked around. He only felt that the whole Great Sui Kingdom was gloomy. Ji Qiu, or Wang Zhu, stayed alone in the deserted post house. A tall and thin middle-aged Taoist priest cast a camouflage spell to hide his true appearance. He led 2 cultivators from Marshall Mountain to the post house quietly. They found Ji Qiu leaning against the railing under the eaves, listening to the wind chime. The middle-aged Taoist priest withdrew his spell and revealed his true appearance. He was surrounded by immortal qi and had a fishtail crown on his head. Just by standing in the yard, he exuded the aura of the great Tao that coexisted with the world. He stood between heaven and earth like a great mountain. Ji Qiu just glanced at the Taoist priest of the Divine Advice sect, Qi Zhen, the master of the orthodoxy of the Aquarius continent. As for the cultivator with a sword on his back, she did not even look at him. She paid more attention to the young man with a black cat on his shoulder. He was quiet and gentle, similar to the fool in Apricot Blossom Lane in her memory. He was more delicate. His face was slightly pale. He looked at her with a warm smile and a burning possessiveness hidden in the depths of his eyes. Goodbye. Jigui didn't like this guy very much. It wasn't that she had any prejudice against him, but that Ma Kuxuan's grandmother really made her loathe him too much. All the bad habits that common women in the world should not have seemed to have all been taken up by that old woman. Every time she went to the Iron Lock well to fetch water, as long as she ran into that old woman, she would inevitably have to listen to some sarcastic remarks. If Ji Gui hadn't been completely suppressed by the rules of Black Pearl Grotto Heaven back then, she would have 100 ways to make that long-tongued old woman wish she was dead. Later, Old Man Yang lost his mind and actually gave the old woman a good fortune, turning her into the river granny of the Dragon Whisker River in the small town. Ji Gui could only continue to wait for an opportunity. One day, she would let that old woman, whose real name was Ma Lanhua, taste the taste of purgatory on earth. As for what would happen to Ma Kuxuan, did she care? He didn't care at all. Qi Zhen smiled and said, Miss Ji Qiu, I've already done what Chief Lu asked me to do. Now that the Shunhu sect has just obtained a brand new broken blessed land, I welcome Miss Ji Qiu to enter and seek opportunities. I'm willing to escort you all the way. Although Qi Zhen was from the second Taoists branch, Lu Chen was originally one of the 3 chiefs. Now, he was even in charge of overseeing the Beko Keikyang building. Qi Zhen was naturally overjoyed to be able to do this for Lu Chen. Being able to enter Chief Lu's discerning eyes, Qi Zhen was sure that it was no longer an extravagant hope for him to reach the Ascendant Realm in the future. When Qi Zhen was young, he once received a prophecy from an otherworldly expert: even immortals have to look at plum blossoms to quench their thirst. Before the 12 realms, it was naturally a prophecy of great fortune. When Qi Zhen ascended to the Lord of Heaven, it was almost an unlucky prophecy of walking to the end and slowly waiting for death. As for Chief Lu Chen, he happened to be one of the influential figures in the world who loved to change the fates of people who were pleasing to his eyes. It was said that Chief Lu's favorite pastime was to carve rotten wood. Ma Kuxuan only had eyes for her. Looking at the lady that he had liked for a long time, he smiled and said, There's no need to trouble the Lord of Heaven. I can do it. Ji Qiu ignored the Daoist Lord of Heaven. She didn't even straighten her posture. She still tilted her head lazily and looked at Ma Kuxuan. You're the fortune that Lu Chen promised to give me. Are you going to listen to my orders from now on? Back then, Lu Chen had set up a fortune-telling stall. After meeting Emperor Dali and Song Jisin, he went to Mud Bottle Alley alone and found her. He said that he had used a little trick to obtain Song Jungchun's permission to let Ma Kuxuan go. Thus, it was perfectly justifiable for him to take Ma Kuxuan into his pocket. Lu Chen planned to give Ma Kuxuan to Ji Qiu. Ji Qiu didn't care about the ins and outs of the story. In the beginning, she didn't pay much attention to it because she didn't think that Ma Kuxuan could do much. However, after Ma Kuxuan became famous in Martial Mountain and broke through 2 realms, she felt that although Ma Kuxuan wasn't one of the 5, there might be something else going on. Ji Qiu couldn't be bothered to think too much about it. After all, it wasn't a bad thing to have another weapon in her hands. Now, other than the Fu family in Old Dragon City, she had nothing else to do. She could use her subordinates. Ma Kuxuan nodded and said, I'll listen to you. Just tell me who you want to kill. As long as it's not an old bastard in the upper 5 realms, I promise I'll bring back his head. As for the upper 5 realms, wait for a while. I can do it in the future, and it shouldn't take too long. Because he liked Ji Qiu, Ma Kuxuan had been nagged by his grandmother many times in the Apricot Blossom Alley. It was only on this matter that his grandmother, who doted on him the most, would say a few words. Ji Qiu asked, then can you kill Chen Pingan? The Martial Mountain Dao Protector's heart tightened, and he said in a low voice, no. Ji Qiu just stared at Ma Kuxuan. Ma Kuxuan smiled and said, in the Cliff Academy, there's a sage overseeing it. I can't kill Chen Pingan. However, you can give me a time limit, such as 1 year, 3 years, or something like that. However, to be honest, if the rumors are true, it's not easy to kill Chen Pingan right now, unless… Ji Qiu nodded and interrupted Ma Kuxuan's words, then forget it. It seems like you are not that powerful. Lu Chen was not very kind to give the exquisite pagoda to the descendant of the heavenly lord Xie Shi, that silly long eyebrows. His first gift was an exquisite pagoda that was comparable to an immortal weapon. When it was my turn, he was so petty. The Martial Mountain Military Dao Protector was afraid that Ma Kuxuan would be angry after hearing these words. However, when he used a secret technique to observe Ma Kuxuan's heart lake, it was as calm as a mirror, and there were even some colorful lights that symbolized joy on the surface of the mirror. Ma Kuxuan smiled brightly and said, Wang Zhu, just you wait. One day, you'll know that I'm the best. What priceless immortal weapon? What heaven's chosen? What heaven's chosen? When we look back, they will all be trash and ants. Ji Qiu was a little confused. What do you like about me? I didn't have much interaction with you in the small town, so I don't remember clearly. Maybe we didn't even talk to each other. Even though he was ignored, Ma Kuxuan's performance was enough to stun all the ancestors of Martial Mountain. For the first time, he was a little embarrassed, but he didn't give an answer. Ji Qiu suddenly laughed and pointed at Ma Kuxuan. Ma Kuxuan, aren't you the most famous genius in the Aquarius continent? Ma Kuxuan's lips curled up. In an instant, he returned to the domineering cultivator that everyone was familiar with. He was so talented that his peers felt despair, and the old cultivators felt like they had lived for hundreds of years in vain. Most importantly, Ma Kuxuan had left the mountain several times to train himself, and he had fought in the arena of Martial Mountain. He was decisive, cruel, and bloody. Life and death were decided in the blink of an eye, and he liked to eliminate the root of the problem. Ma Kuxuan said slowly, I'm not a genius. The black cat that was squatting on his shoulder curled up its body and raised its claws to lick it. It was especially docile. Ji Qiu sized him up and curled her lips, up to you. Ma Kuxuan asked, if I kill Song Jisin one day, will you be angry? Ji Qiu seemed a little annoyed, and she glared at him. Ma Kuxuan, please don't talk so big before you're not strong enough. Otherwise, it'll be very annoying. Ma Kuxuan smiled, I'll listen to you. The Martial Mountain Dao Protector who had watched Ma Kuxuan grow up felt complicated. Heavenly Lord Qizhen didn't care about this. However, out of respect for Sect Master Lu, who had returned to the Beko Kekyung building, he stood there patiently and watched these juniors chat like they were playing house. Regardless of GQ and Ma Kushwan's identities, as long as they didn't reach the upper 5 realms, they were 2 delicate porcelain pieces that could break at any moment. Ma Kushwan said regretfully, "I'll go to the Zhuing dynasty and kill a few Earth Immortal sword cultivators to break through." GQ said carelessly, "I don't care where you're going." Ma Kushwan laughed and turned to Qi Zhen, "Heavenly Lord, please take us out of the city." Qi Zhen nodded and said goodbye to GQ, and the 3 of them disappeared. The Great Sui Kingdom's capital array didn't notice anything strange. It was as if no one was there. In the entire Aquarius continent, only Dallas capital city could make this Heavenly Lord wary. GQ leaned on the railing and felt a little sleepy. She closed her eyes and scratched the railing with her slender fingernails, making squeaking sounds. She turned around and leaned back against the railing. Her head was tilted back, and her curves were exquisite. She bent her fingers and flicked them again and again, and the wind chimes under the eaves jingled. In the twilight, she stared at him with her golden eyes that had vertical pupils. The strange phenomenon disappeared. She stood up and looked at the courtyard door with a smile. Song Jisin walked into the courtyard with a faint smell of alcohol. She asked, "Was the 1,000-old banquet fun?" Song Jisin shook his sleeves and sighed, "Those old fellows at the banquet wanted to skin the 3 of us alive, eat our flesh and drink our blood. It scared me to death." GQ asked curiously, "Didn't we form a 100-year alliance? They have no enmity with young master, and our Dali cavalry didn't even pass by their gates and went straight to the south. Why are they so unfriendly?" Song Jisin leaned against the railing and thought for a while before replying, "I'm used to living a good life. I can't take any grievances." GQ said with a look of realization, "If that's the case, then this servant's temper is much better than theirs." Song Jisin mistakenly thought that she was talking about the nonsense that happened in the nearby streets. He smiled and said, "When young master becomes successful, I will definitely help you vent your anger." GQ nodded and asked, "Those 3 books, young master still can't figure them out?" Song Jisin was a little tired. He closed his eyes and rubbed his cheeks with both hands. "Maybe they're just ordinary books. I've been so paranoid for so long." Song Jisin suddenly reached into his sleeve and took out a local flower that looked like it was often seen in the countryside. He tossed the 4-legged snake onto the ground. During the Feast of the 1,000-old, it had been restless. If it wasn't for Shu Ruo suppressing it with her sword will, it would have pounced on the emperor of the Great Sui and eaten his head for supper. The maid squatted down and took out a grain rain coin and placed it in her palm. The 4-legged snake was timid and didn't dare to swallow the delicacy in one gulp. Song Jisin bent down and looked at the little fellow with a horn on its forehead. He said helplessly, "Look at your cowardly appearance. Look at that water dragon of yours at Booksword Lake. It's a world of difference." Song Jisin didn't care about it anymore. He yawned and went into the house to sleep. GQ waved her hand, but the 4-legged snake still didn't dare to move forward. "At least you know what's good for you." GQ smiled and threw the grain rain coin into its mouth. The little guy seemed to be wronged and whined softly. GQ clenched her fist and punched it on the head. "Don't you know that if you don't open for 3 years, you'll be able to eat for 3 years?" She stood up and kicked the 4-legged snake into the courtyard. "You don't even have the slightest ability, yet you still dare to have extravagant hopes for the imperial preceptor's ancient malt. Not only did you secretly drool, but you even got caught red-handed. How did you end up with such an incompetent thing like you?" GQ sat on the steps, took off an embroidered shoe, and waved at it. The little guy obediently came to her feet. She was still angry, so she picked up the embroidered shoe and hit the little guy. Linlu Academy was built on the cloud-splitting mountain in Longquan County. The prince of the Great Sui Kingdom, Gao Xian, studied here. Neither the Great Sui Kingdom nor Dali deliberately hid this fact. This was Gao Xian's 2nd time entering Longquan County. However, the first time he was in the sky, he had to walk through the heavenly cloud ladder of Liju Grotto Heaven. This time, he was on the ground, on the real territory of Dali. Cloud-splitting mountain was now the northern peak of Dali. The mountain was new, and so was the academy. From the teachers who preached to the young scholars who studied, they were all new. Linlu Academy was organized by the Dali Imperial Court. It did not have the title of one of the 72 academies. The head and deputy head of the academy were not very famous. One of them was the old assistant minister of Huangting Kingdom, a vassal of the Great Sui Kingdom. However, everyone knew that Linlu Academy was definitely aiming for the 72. The Song clan was determined to get it. At first, Jiao Xian thought that there would be a lot of conflicts in the academy. At the very least, there would be some supercilious looks. Otherwise, there would be some malicious probing, just like Li Baoping and Yu Lu when they came to the Cliff Academy in Donghua Mountain. They would suffer some bullying. However, after a few months in Linlu Academy, Jiao Xian was a little disappointed. It seemed that from the teachers to the students, they did not pay much attention to him, a student or classmate of the prince of an enemy country. Li showed a clear hostility. Jiao Xian was puzzled for a long time. Later, he was enlightened by the words of the old ancestor of the Jiao family of Guiyang, who cultivated in Cloud-Splitting Mountain. In just 100 years, the Dali dynasty had grown from a vassal state of the Lu dynasty, from a muddy pond where eunuchs interfered in politics and relatives monopolized power, to the current overlord of the northern Aquarius continent. During this period, there were endless wars. People were dying, and they were annexing neighboring countries. Even the people in the capital of Dali came from all over. They did not have the status of many people in the imperial court of the Great Sui Kingdom. How it was now was the same for their ancestors 200 or 300 years ago. Jiao Xian understood immediately. Flowing water does not rot, and the pivot does not rust. However, the old ancestor of the Jiao family, who used to be a storyteller in the capital of the Great Sui Kingdom, sighed. Flowing water? It's bleeding. Whenever Jiao Xian had free time, he would carry his bookcase and travel alone to the mountains to the west of Longquan County, or he would walk through the streets and alleys of the small town, or he would stroll through the newly built county city in the north. He would even take a slight detour and go to an incense-burning road in the north that had a mountain deity temple to eat a bowl of wontons. The owner was surnamed Dong. He was a tall young man who treated people amiably. As time went by, Jiao Xian became friends with him. If Dong Shuijing wasn't busy, he would even personally cook a couple of home-cooked dishes for the two of them to drink some wine. Jiao Xian would occasionally go to an empty house. It was said that the head of the house was a man called Li Er. Now that the house was occupied by his wife's family, he was thinking of how to sell it for a high price. However, he seemed to have run into a wall at the county office. After all, he did not have the title deed. Inside Jiao Xian's bookcase, there was a Dragon King basket. Every day, according to the secret technique taught by the old ancestor of the Jiao family, he would pour small grains of money into it, causing the spiritual qi inside to be as thick as water. In the small bamboo fish basket, there was a golden carp swimming slowly. That was the first time Jiao Xian met Li Er. Of course, there was also Chen Pinggan. Before Jiao Xian came here, he had already mentally prepared himself. Perhaps one day, he would need to hand over the Dragon King basket and the golden carp to an influential person in the Dali dynasty as the price for studying in Linlu Academy. However, even the county magistrate and county governor Wu had not come to see him. Jiao Xian was squatting beside a stream to wash his face. Suddenly, he turned his head and saw a handsome man in a snow-white robe with a golden earring dangling from his ear. Jiao Xian quickly stood up and bowed. Jiao Xian greets the North Mountain God. The Dali North Mountain God, Wei Pai, smiled. There's no need to be so polite. I see that you've been to many places. It's not a good idea to carry the Dragon King basket around all the time. If you trust me, why don't you open the Dragon King basket and put the golden carp into the stream and raise it in the running water? Using spiritual qi as water is a dead nourishment. Over time, it will lose its spirituality. Its cultivation will rise quickly in a short period of time, but it will be stuck at the nascent soul realm bottleneck. Although it will absorb less spiritual qi every day if it is placed in the water, and its cultivation progress will be relatively slow, the benefits outweigh the disadvantages in the long run. Wei Pai pointed into the distance. From here to the Dragon Whisker River, and then to the Tiefu River, it can swim freely. If it swims, I will inform the Two River Woman and the god of Jiang. I won't restrict its cultivation. Jiao Xian was actually a little hesitant. He had never interacted with the Dali North Mountain god. How could he be at ease? The golden carp in the basket was an existence that the old ancestor said had the potential to jump through the dragon gate of the Central Plains and become a true dragon. On the Great Tao, one's heart was small, and all kinds of schemes were endless. Since Jiao Xian was already living under someone else's roof, he had to accept it. What he recognized was the general trend. His Tao heart would become firmer. Working hard in adversity was the best way to sharpen one's mind. However, if he was schemed against and lost the fortune that belonged to him, then he would not only lose a golden carp, but also a flaw and gap would appear in Jiao Xian's great Tao. Wei Pai smiled and said, "It's okay. It won't be too late to let it go when you think it through." Wei Pai was about to turn and leave. The old ancestor of the Jiao family suddenly swept over from the cloud-padding mountain and appeared beside Jiao Xian. He said to Jiao Xian, "Just listen to Mr. Wei. There's nothing to lose." Jiao Xian saw that his old ancestor had appeared, so he no longer hesitated. He opened the bamboo box, took out the Dragon King basket, and placed the golden carp into the stream. The golden carp swung its tail happily and flashed downstream. Jiao Xian squatted by the water, holding the empty fish basket in his hand. He muttered, "After being in a cage for a long time, I've returned to nature." Back then, Zhao Yarrow left the Pearl Grotto heaven on an ox cart according to his grandfather's arrangement. He went to an immortal sect in the center of the Aquarius continent near the Western Sea to cultivate. However, he met a youth with a mole on his forehead on the way. He called himself Xiu Hu. In the end, Zhao Yarrow handed over the spring seal that Mr. gave him because the other party was the Dali imperial tutor, Kui Dong. In the small town school, Zhao Yarrow accompanied Mr. the most among his generation. Li Baoping and the other children, Song Jisin, a peer that Zhao Yarrow admired, were not as good as him in this matter. Throughout Zhao Yarrow's journey, Kui Dong gave him a secret cultivation technique and 2 immortal artifacts in exchange. He was always able to turn misfortunes into blessings. However, when Zhao Yarrow neared the immortal abode, the ox cart was already at the foot of the mountain. The haggard Zhao Yarrow suddenly changed his mind and abandoned the ox cart. He released the water buffalo and continued to the Western Sea alone. Finally, he found a legendary immortal ferry and took a ferry to the isolated immortal island in the sea. He then changed to another ferry and continued towards the central divine continent. After all, in the entire Aquarius continent, only Old Dragon City had intercontinental ferries and most of them were merchant ships that hung upside down mountains. Therefore, if Qi cultivators of the Aquarius continent wanted to go to the central divine continent, they could only use Zhao Yarrow's method, which was to use the short and medium distance ferries of the immortal sects on the sea. However, halfway through the journey, the immortal ferry that Zhao Yarrow was on met with a calamity. It was smashed by a swarm of flying fish that covered the sky like a swarm of locusts. Zhao Yarrow and the majority of the passengers fell into the sea. Some died on the spot. Zhao Yarrow managed to escape with a protective artifact, but the sea was vast and boundless. It seemed that he would be buried in the belly of the fishes sooner or later. The 2 golden core cultivators on the ferry wanted to escape with the wind. One of them tried to break through the formation of the flying fish, but in the end, he was killed by the endless school of flying fish in despair. The other saw that the situation was not good and was exhausted. He could only quickly descend and escape into the sea. Zhao Yarrow sat on a huge piece of wood from the wreckage of the ferry. His body was tied tightly to the bag. He drifted for an unknown period of time. His face was haggard and he was in a state worse than death. Finally, Zhao Yarrow couldn't hold on any longer. He fainted and fell into the sea. Relying on the last bit of spiritual light from his protective artifact, he drifted with the current. When Zhao Yarrow opened his eyes in a daze, he found himself lying on a bed. He abruptly woke up and sat up. This was a relatively spacious but simple thatched hut. The walls were filled with yellowed books, making it difficult for one to walk. Zhao Yarrow, who was already skin and bones, stood up and discovered that the bag was placed on the bed. He opened it and found that nothing was missing. He felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Zhao Yarrow walked along a small path that was half the height of a person. He walked out of the thatched cottage and pushed open the door. The mountain wilderness suddenly opened up. He discovered that the thatched cottage was built on the peak of a cliff. Opening the door allowed him to see the sea. Zhao Yarrow even saw a sheathless sword stuck diagonally into the mountain peak. It was rusty and dull. Zhao Yarrow walked to the edge of the cliff and stared blankly at the bottomless abyss. Just as Zhao Yarrow was about to take a step forward, a gentle voice sounded from beside him. The heavens never seal off all paths. Are you really that disappointed in yourself? Zhao Yarrow's eyes were hazy with tears. He turned his head and saw a slender man in a green robe gazing at the sea. The young Zhao Yarrow wiped away his tears and suddenly asked, "Sir, you must be an otherworldly expert. Can you accept me as your disciple? I want to learn the techniques of immortals." The man shook his head and smiled. "I've never had a master, and I've never accepted a disciple. I'm afraid of trouble. You stay here and recuperate. I'll send you away." Zhao Yarrow asked, "Where is this?" The man smiled. "The mortal world. Where else could it be?" Zhao Yarrow was probably at his most desperate and fragile moment. He asked bluntly, "I want to know where in the mortal world this is." The man didn't get angry. He smiled and said, "I'm not trying to pick on you. This is just an ordinary place without a name. It's not some immortal's residence. The spiritual chi is thin, and it's not far from the central divine continent. If you're lucky, you might even encounter fishermen or pearl divers." After that, Zhao Yarrow stayed here to recuperate. After interacting with him for a long time, he realized that the man was actually very ordinary. Even though there were many books in the thatched cottages at the top of the mountain, the man didn't say anything profound. He had to eat every day and would often walk down the mountain to the beach. Zhao Yarrow spent his days reading books or sitting by the cliff in a daze. Only one day, when Zhao Yarrow was bored out of his wits and wanted to pull out the sword from the ground, did the man stand by his cottage and remind Zhao Yarrow not to touch it. Zhao Yarrow asked curiously, "Does this sword have a name?" The man in green shook his head. "It doesn't." Zhao Yarrow asked again, "Sir, are you someone who failed in the imperial examinations? Or did you leave the mainland to live here in seclusion to escape from your enemies?" The man shook his head again. "Neither. It's not as complicated as you think. I just agree with the saying, life is difficult, and the great Tao is complicated. Since the path is difficult, then stop, be lazy, and think about it." Zhao Yarrow probed, "Sir, are you really not some otherworldly expert? Like a Jindan or Yuaniing realm land immortal?" The man smiled and asked, "Of course I'm not an earth immortal. Besides, what does it have to do with you, Zhao Yarrow?" Zhao Yarrow had lived here for almost 2 years. The island wasn't too big, and Zhao Yarrow could already explore the entire island alone. Just as the man said, if he was lucky, he could meet fishermen who went out to sea to fish, or pearl divers who took great risks but could become rich overnight. Zhao Yarrow's mind calmed down, and he took the initiative to tell the man that he wanted to travel to the central divine continent. The man smiled and nodded. "Be careful on the road. Remember not to be disappointed in yourself. Perhaps that's the most disappointing thing." Zhao Yarrow was a little embarrassed. Finally, he took out the wooden dragon paperweight. "To repay you for saving my life, I would like to give this to you, sir." The man waved his hand, seemingly a little helpless. Since when has the outside world become such a moral thing to do to save people within one's power? Zhao Yarrow said stubbornly, "Sir saved me without asking for anything in return, but the person who was saved cannot ignore it. This is the most important thing I have on me. Using it to repay you, sir, is just right." The man smiled. "That means the world hasn't become too bad." But the man did not accept the paperweight in the end. Zhao Yarrow sat on a self-made wooden raft and headed to land. Standing on the raft, Zhao Yarrow bowed to the man on the shore and bade him farewell. After that, the man continued to live a leisurely life. One day, the sword on the mountain peak started to hum. The man stood beside the sword and looked in the direction of the Aquarius continent. He smiled and said, "Don't bother with it. The sword's hum gradually stopped. After that, 2 guests appeared on the island. One was an old Daoist with a red nose, and the other was a young Daoist. The latter immediately squatted on the ground and vomited. Starting from the alley in the southeast of the Aquarius continent, to the shore of the Aquarius continent's western ocean, then to a lone island overseen by an immortal family, and finally to this place. The young Daoist had already vomited time and time again. The old Daoist immediately squatted down and patted his disciple's back. He said guiltily, "It's fine, it's fine." After vomiting this time, vomiting once more, maybe twice, it will be over. The young Daoist almost vomited his bile. He asked with red eyes, "Master, you keep saying that, when will it end? Can you give me a definite answer?" The old Daoist, who was dressed in a strange Daoist robe, had fire dragons swimming in his sleeves. He smiled awkwardly. The young Daoist stood up and asked, "Master, you said you want to bring me to meet the person you admire the most, but you are not willing to tell me his background. Why?" The old Daoist smiled but did not say anything. He raised his head and asked, "Open the door, we master and disciple will ask you for a cup of tea, is that okay?" The man sighed and appeared on the shore. He stood 3 feet away from the master and disciple. "I am a scholar, and you are a great heavenly master of Mount Longhu with a different surname. You want to compete with me in thunder and talisman?" The old Daoist had already used his divine ability to prevent his disciple from hearing this person's words. There were some things that he still needed to hide from this foolish disciple. The short old Daoist smiled and asked, "You won't even let me in? Why, does this mean you have agreed to compete with me in Tao? If I can enter, it will be my win, and you will lend me that sword." The man shook his head. "Are you really going to pester me like this?" The young Daoist, Zhong Shanfeng, could not hear what his master and the green-robed man were talking about. In fact, Zhong Shanfeng was shocked to find that the green-robed man's face made him forget what he had seen previously. The old Daoist laughed. "Ayo, you are angry. If you have the ability, come out and hit me." The corner of the man's mouth twitched. Zhong Shanfeng suddenly heard his master's shameless words. He could not help but remind him softly, "Master, although you have always claimed that you are a cultivator who has achieved Tao, as a Qi cultivator on the mountain, you should pay attention to your manners and demeanor when you come to visit." The old Daoist nodded repeatedly and then glared at the man. "What kind of hero are you to use such tricks?" The man said, "You can't even pull out that sword, what can I borrow?" The old Daoist's expression was solemn. "I still can't pull it out with my current realm?" The man nodded and said, "Even if you are 1 realm higher, you still can't control it." The old Daoist sighed deeply. Back then, there was a secret matter on Mount Longhu. The old Daoist had promised the previous generation's great heavenly master that only by killing that ascendant realm demon could he rightfully return to Mount Longhu. Now, the odds of victory were 80 to 20, and he was confident of victory. However, if it was a battle of life and death, the odds were only 50-50. The old Daoist looked at the disciple he had placed the most hope on and decided to give it a try. The man suddenly looked at the young Daoist. "This fist intent of yours." Zhong Shanfeng was carrying an ordinary peachwood sword of Mount Longhu on his back and a damaged ancient sword engraved with the words "True Martial." After hearing the man's question, Zhong Shanfeng was confused. The old Daoist said proudly, "How is it? Isn't it amazing? This disciple of mine created it himself." The man in the green robe revealed a look of admiration for the first time. Maybe he can open up a path for the martial arts of the world and evolve a lot of merit. Yes, what's more rare is that his heart is sincere. You have taken in a good disciple. The old Daoist smiled from ear to ear and began to talk nonsense. "You're flattering me. I'm just SOSO. There are actually 7 or 8 disciples like me." Zhong Shanfeng didn't feel that his master was boasting, nor was he disappointed. Back then, when he cultivated on the mountain, he was indeed the most ordinary person. He was far inferior to his senior brothers and sisters, and even some of the junior Taoists who were only his martial nephews. The man smiled and said, "Mount Longhu is a great place. Drive heard that it's as difficult as ascending the sky for you to bring this disciple up the mountain to worship the ancestors. It just so happens that that demon has indeed crossed the line. The man thought for a moment. Wait for me for an incense stick's time. He turned and walked up the mountain peak. The man in the green robe casually grabbed the long sword stuck in the mountain peak. This outsider who only wanted to admit that he was a scholar didn't have any high-spirited expression. Even when he pulled out the long sword that even a great heavenly master with a different surname couldn't pull out, it didn't cause any heavenly phenomena. It was just like any poor scholar in the world who sat in a study room and picked up a pen, wanting to write some tofu-sized articles. He went to a bottomless abyss that no one in the Central Plains dared to enter, and with a single sword, he killed the level 13 demon that occupied the bottom of the abyss. He returned to the mountain peak and stabbed the rusty longsword back into the ground. He walked down the mountain and said to the old Daoist, "Now you can climb up Mount Longhu." The old Daoist smiled mischievously and said, "It's embarrassing. I can't thank you enough for your kindness. We'll take our leave first. We'll come again in the future." He pulled the confused Zhong Shanfeng by the arm and used his feet to draw talismans. He directly shrank thousands of miles and went to a tall mountain in the Central Plains. The man in the green robe didn't mind. He stood where he was and continued to look at the sea. Zhao Yarrow was young and ignorant back then and had once asked him if he was a disappointed person. This question was really interesting. Because this scholar had always been known as the proudest person in the world. He first set a small goal, such as 1 second. Remember, 15. 416. Chapter 2, There were 3 moons hanging in the sky. This was a scene that could never be seen in the vast world. The pure moonlight shone freely between heaven and earth, illuminating the 100,000 mountains as if they were covered with thick snow. Rustling sounds could be heard in the endless mountains, and the sound could easily spread for hundreds of miles. If there were immortals who could freely ride the wind in the sea of clouds and look down, they would see golden-armored puppets as tall as mountains moving mountains and slowly trudging. There were also some ancient fierce beasts that were thousands of feet long and covered in scars. Without exception, they were ordered by the golden-armored puppets with long whips to do hard labor and drag the mountains without complaint. Occasionally, there would be some savage beasts that were able to rest for a short while, and they would use some mountain peaks as pillows in exhaustion as they slept soundly. Their bodies didn't have the slightest innate ferocious aura since a long time ago, and it had been completely worn away by the endless years of hardship. This scene could only be passed down by word of mouth in this world. It was far from the truth. Because no one dared to fly over the 100,000 mountains without permission. In the long history, there were indeed some great demons of the upper 5 realms who didn't believe in heresy. Then, they were dragged down by countless golden-armored puppets and eventually became one of those great demons who worked hard. They became huge skeletons that slept forever in the mountains and couldn't even be reincarnated. At the top of the mountains, there was a dilapidated thatched cottage. Behind the cottage was a vegetable garden with rare greenery. The thatched cottage was surrounded by a crooked wooden fence, and a skinny watchdog was lying at the door, panting slightly. A thin old man stood in the open space outside the door. Facing the mountain, he stretched out his hand and scratched his cheek. No one knew what he was thinking. The skinny dog suddenly got up and flew out, roaring toward a direction. A majestic wind in the shape of a tornado swept out in a mighty manner, directly blowing up a large sea of dark clouds that covered one of the bright moons. The old man was still indifferent. When the sea of clouds was broken, golden-armored puppets stood on the ground around the mountain, holding all kinds of exaggerated weapons that matched their bodies. Among them, there was no lack of snow-white skeletons of ancient fierce beasts as long spears. One of the golden-armored puppets threw the white bone spear in its hand into the sky. Thunder rumbled, as if it had the might to split the heavens and earth apart. The spear was aimed at the 2 grain-sized figures in the sky. The 2 visitors who had come from afar were in human form. One of them was a tall old man dressed in a bright red robe. The surface of his robe rippled, and a sea of blood surged. Vicious-looking faces vaguely appeared on the robe, and they attempted to reach out of the sea. However, they were quickly drowned by the blood. This tall and sturdy old man was wearing a black belt made of an unknown material. Pieces of sword fragments were embedded in it. Beside the old man was a young-looking junior with a long sword hanging from each side of his waist. On his back was a snow-white sword case, revealing the hilts of 3 long swords. Seeing that the spear was about to pierce through the air, the young man's eyes were burning. However, it was not directed at the spear, but at the old man on the peak of the mountain whose back was facing them. With just a glance from the red-robed old man, the spear turned into dust and scattered in all directions. The other sharp weapons that were thrown were the same. They all shattered before they could get close to the old man. The red-robed old man was a little annoyed. It was not because he was stopped by this wave of attacks, but because he was angry at the way the old man treated his guests. He looked down on them too much. He only let the golden-armored puppets attack. In any case, it was better to release the old fellows in the underground prison. The red-robed old man sneered, "Old blind, have you really forgotten who your master is after living in someone else's territory for so long? Are you using these to scratch my itch?" With a slap, one of the golden-armored puppets on the ground was instantly smashed into the ground. Dust flew everywhere. After that, he did not stop attacking. A series of firecrackers sounded on the ground. The golden-armored puppets that were as tall as mountains were all smashed into nothingness. The short old man on the peak of the mountain turned his head and looked at the 2 great demons that stood at the top of the world. His eye sockets were empty, like 2 bottomless abysses. The short old man, who was called Old Blind, was still scratching his cheeks. Logically speaking, if the same level 13 cultivators or the few hidden level 14 cultivators were to fight in their own territory, unless the outsiders brought unreasonable weapons. Of course, such things could be counted with several worlds added together. Other than the 4 swords, such as a Beko Keikyung building, a string of Buddhist beads, or a book, they were usually in an invincible position in their own territory. It was even possible for them to kill the other party. Especially after entering the first level of the 2 lost realms, if they had nothing better to do, they would go to other places to have fun. It was the most natural thing to be suppressed by the rules of the great Tao of that world. However, the world was so big that there were always a few exceptions. What was so strange about that? For example, this old blind. He was an outsider in the wilderness, but he was living more freely than his master. Another example was that stinky cow nose of the world. The old blind said with a hoarse voice, "If it were that guy, it would be more appropriate. As for the 2 of you, if you continue to stand so high, I won't be polite anymore." The young man who had 5 swords on him smiled. As the youngest sword cultivator of the upper 5 realms, he had participated in that earth-shattering battle and even defeated the sword immortal of the Great Wall of Sword Chi, causing the other party to be reduced to one of the gatekeepers of the inverted mountain. He felt that the old blind under his feet was indeed very powerful, but not to the point of being lawless. The red-robed elder's expression was uncertain. His ferocious aura almost caused the surrounding river of time to stagnate. But in the end, he only snorted coldly and turned to leave. The young sword immortal great demon with outstanding battle achievements hesitated for a moment, and a slightly anxious voice sounded in his mind. "Leave quickly." Suddenly, a huge pulling force engulfed the sword immortal great demon. The sword immortal great demon was about to use this opportunity to attack the old blind, but he realized that the red-robed elder had roared angrily, grabbed his shoulder, and threw him into the sky. Then, the red-robed elder waved his sleeve, and a turbulent river of blood rolled out in an attempt to interrupt the aura that had targeted the sword immortal great demon. The world turned upside down, and the aura became chaotic. Feeling the suffocating pressure of the great Tao, the red-robed elder's expression changed slightly. He waved his sleeve with all his strength, and the rivers of blood almost converged into a huge lake. He said sternly, "Old blind, do you believe that I won't destroy this 100,000 mountains of yours?" The old blind stopped scratching his cheeks. At this moment, a majestic voice sounded in this huge small world. "Enough." The red-robed elder angrily stopped and retracted his divine ability, and the rivers of blood returned to his sleeve. The old blind reached out and grabbed, dragging the sword immortal great demon to his feet. He squatted down, and the sword immortal great demon found himself unable to move. The short old man reached out and dug out an eyeball from his eye socket, put it into his mouth, and chewed. He turned his head and spat it on the ground. As a result, the skinny old dog, who was salivating, ran over and swallowed it in one bite. Blind stood up and used the tip of his foot to kick the sword immortal demon that was missing an eyeball into the air. "This is on account of you." The world returned to silence. The old blind walked towards the courtyard with his hands behind his back. He looked at the old dog and sneered, "A dog can't change its habit of eating shit." He raised his hand to scratch his cheeks again and turned to walk towards the cliff. He had a nagging feeling that some of the ink on the painting needed to be removed or added. He continued to stand there. The old blind suddenly frowned and hesitated for a moment. With a slight movement of his finger, the golden-armored puppets that had stood up once more returned to their seats. The guests this time were an old man and a young woman from the Great Wall of Sword Chi. The old blind man gave the travel-worn young woman a smile that even he found awkward. Perhaps anyone who saw it would only find it eerie and terrifying. Then, he turned to look at the old man and said angrily, "Chen Qingju, don't bother me. I won't help anyone this time." The boss of the Great Wall of Sword Chi, Sword Immortal Chen Qingju. Chen Qingju asked, "Are you still human?" The blind old man replied, "Ask yourself, are we still human?" Chen Qingju nodded. "I am." The old blind was silent for a moment and asked, "No matter how fierce the war between the two worlds is, can it be as fierce as it was in the past?" "At most, it will only shatter that one even more. If it was like that in the past, how much can it change after 1,000 or 10,000 years? Isn't the world still the same? What's the point? Perhaps it's better to completely overturn it and smash it to pieces to make it whole again." Chen Qingju said, "Serves you right for being blind." The old blind suddenly laughed. "That's good. Forget about you, a watchdog that works for others. The hound is cooked after the rabbit is caught. Once isn't enough. Do you want to have a taste of it again? In my opinion, the reason why you felon survivors ended up in your current predicament was because of Chen Qingju and the rest of you. I've been here for so long. Do you know why I've never been willing to look north? I'm afraid that if I see you, the biggest joke in the world, I'll laugh myself to death." The old blind pointed at the trembling old dog at the courtyard's entrance. "Look at you, Chen Qingju. How are you any better than that?" The old blind shifted his gaze and laughed hoarsely at the young girl. "Lass Ning, don't be angry. It has nothing to do with you. You're still pretty good." Ning Yarrow remained silent. Chen Qingju quickly left with Ning Yarrow. The old blind sighed softly. He was no longer in the mood to admire the unfinished painting of mountains and rivers. As he walked towards the courtyard's entrance, he saw the old dog with its head raised and tongue sticking out. The old blind suddenly stretched out his foot and stomped heavily on the old dog's back. It immediately whimpered and begged for mercy. The old blind directly broke the spine of this ancient great demon with incomparably tenacious vitality. After all, with the young great demon's eyeballs, it would quickly recover. The old blind muttered to himself as he walked into the courtyard. On the wall of the Great Wall of Sword Chi, eldest Sword Immortal was sitting cross-legged while Ning Yarrow was drinking. Chen Qingju said indifferently, "There's no need to stand up for me. The old blind was the one who was hurt the most back then. Therefore, it wasn't as the rumors said, that he lost his eyes after losing a huge battle with the ancestral demon of the desolate world. Instead, he cut out his own eyeballs a long time ago. He threw one of them into the vast world and the other into the firmament world. I went to look for him this time because I wanted to hear him say I won't help anyone with my own ears. It's already very good." Ning Yarrow nodded. Ning Yarrow finished half a flask of wine and turned to look at eldest Sword Immortal. Chen Qingju laughed angrily. "Lass Ning, I'm not criticizing you. Why don't you return to your own home? This is Grandpa Chen's territory. How can I be chased away by you?" Although he said that, the old man still jumped off the wall and walked back to his thatched cottage. In fact, he knew the reason. That punk had once punched on the wall. Ning Yarrow took out a scroll from her sleeve and placed the flask of wine to the side. Then, she leaned against the wall and unfolded the carousel of the River of Time. Was this the third or fourth time? On the scroll, the scene was the immortal tomb that she had been to before. A group of children were flying kites. There was a skinny, dark-skinned child who was sitting far away, looking lonely. A peer of the same age who was flying kites passed by that kid and tugged at the kite. Then, he squatted down, picked up a piece of mud, and threw it over. Seeing the figure turn and run, the tall child with the kite in his hand laughed out loud. Ning Yarrow extended a finger and knocked on the scroll. It happened to poke the tall child's head. She muttered a few words. Then, she retracted her hand and quietly finished looking at the scroll. There were actually many other scrolls in front of her, but she would only look at one each time. She turned around and placed her hands behind her head. Then, she gently swung one leg. Liking him had nothing to do with the scroll. After looking at each scroll, her liking changed to liking him even more. Who she, Ning Yarrow, liked had nothing to do with heaven and earth. Chen Pinggan could stupidly practice a million punches for her. But was this a big deal? Ning Yarrow opened her eyes. She felt that even if she died a million times, she could continue to like him. Maro Xiaodong told Chen Pinggan that the undercurrents in the capital of the Great Sui Kingdom would no longer affect the Cliff Academy. Of course, Li Baoping was the happiest. She took Chen Pinggan and began to wander around the capital. Li Baoping spent more than half a month treating little martial uncle to the 2 small eateries in the shabby alleys that she frequented and visiting various scenic spots and historical sites in the Great Sui dynasty. Li Baoping said that there were still a few interesting places that she had not visited. However, after chatting with Kui Dongshan, she learned that little martial uncle had just entered the second realm of Qi refinement warrior. It was the critical period where she needed to absorb the aura of heaven and earth day and night. Chen Pinggan began to cultivate for real. He used the pure yang aura at specific times during the day to warm his internal organs and bones and resist the external evil and turbid aura from corroding his qi residence. He used the clear yin aura at certain times during the night to nourish the 2 aperture points that had already been opened and placed the natal item. Due to the refinement of the golden script Gaul, to a large extent, it involved the cultivation of Confucianism. Maro Xiaodong personally took out a collection of poems and gave Chen Pinggan pointers to read through the 100 or so most famous poems from beyond the Great Wall. He learned that Chen Pinggan had traveled so far and had not even visited an ancient battlefield site on the 2 continents. He only saw a group of monks chanting Buddhist scriptures on a battlefield in the small blessed land of lotus flowers. Therefore, he taught Chen Pinggan another lesson. The true body talisman of the day and night wandering god had been closed by Maro Xiaodong. Otherwise, no matter how high the rank of the talisman was and how slow the loss of aura was, it was not a good thing. As for the method of opening the true body talisman, Kui Dongshan went back to ponder and tinker with it after Chen Pinggan explained in detail the origin of the talisman of the true body talisman. Kui Dongshan licked his face and said that he wanted to flip through the true works of alchemy. He was willing to pay him a small sum of money for every page he turned. Chen Pinggan did not agree. Pei Qian accompanied Chen Pinggan and Li Baoping to walk around several times. He really felt more comfortable in the academy. He walked around every day, leaving early in the morning and returning late at night. He was so tired that he was half dead. He did not have the time to chat with Li Huai in Kui Dongshan's courtyard. Later, he found an excuse to stay in the academy. Chen Pinggan also felt that Pei Qian had walked so far and not one step less than them. He allowed Pei Qian to play around in the academy. However, he would still check on Pei Qian's transcription every day. He also had Zhu Lian keep an eye on Pei Qian's stake-walking and sword practice. When it came to martial arts, it was not important whether Pei Qian was diligent or not. Chen Pinggan did not particularly care about it, but he would not miss an incense stick's worth of time. Maro Xiaodong would often chat with Chen Pinggan. One of them said, "Decrees are only tools for governing a country, not the source of its cleanliness." Maro Xiaodong was probably worried that Chen Pinggan, his junior, would accidentally walk further and further down the path of legalism. He had no choice but to remind him. At the time, Maro Xiaodong laughed and said, "These words were not said by us Confucians. We did not purposely belittle legalism to elevate Confucianism. They were said by a ruthless official of the Central Plains whose name went down in history." Chen Pinggan nodded his head in agreement. In Kui Dongshan's courtyard, Pei Qian, and Li Huai would often get together, flipping and flipping, reading those novels about chivalrous Jianghu characters. They read at varying speeds, so they would often argue about whether or not they should turn the pages. Occasionally, Li Baoping would also read with them for a while. However, Pei Qian and Li Huai liked to see the flash of swords, the flying of flesh and blood, and the soul-stirring scenes of life and death. Li Baoping also read these, but she preferred to read those characters who might not even have a name. She would blindly ponder why these people would write about these places, say these things, and do these things in the books. One day, Zhu Lian took out a stack of his own manuscripts. He wrote about the scenes in the novels where various chivalrous women met with misfortune and were tragically bullied by the famous Jianghu characters and nameless juniors. After Yu Lu secretly read it, he was shocked. Zhu Lian felt that Yu Lu was indeed his confidant. They hit it off very well. Over at Kui Dongshan's study, there were piles of ethereal ancient paintings. There were paintings of birds chirping and flowers fragrant, of empty mountains and fresh rain, and of the old man fishing in the cold river. As a result, that night, Li Huai and Pei Qian painted a snake with feet. They drew on these famous paintings without permission, spoiling the scenery. For example, Pei Qian drew a birdcage for a bird, crooked and crooked. The inspiration came from Qing Luan country's Liu Xiao. Jez Luan cage. Li Huai drew a strange fish that was even bigger than a small boat on the side of the lone boat fisherman's boat. After Kui Dongshan saw it, he did not get angry. One day, Kui Dongshan took out an eccentric palace painting. It was a painting of skeletons and ghosts. He was pleased with himself, saying that he wanted to show it to Pei Qian to broaden his horizons. Pei Qian looked at it carefully. As a result, a skeleton suddenly grew bigger, almost breaking out of the painting. Pei Qian was so scared that his soul almost flew away. He only dared to sit still and cry silently. Even when he saw Chen Pinggan, he only pursed his lips. In the end, Kui Dongshan was chased and beaten by Chen Pinggan. He threw punches and kicks, cursing and swearing. Even the dialect of Longquan County jumped out of his mouth. He grabbed a broom and smashed it on the back of Kui Dongshan's head. Kui Dongshan flew out and fell to the ground, pretending to be dead. Only then did he barely escape. Kui Dongshan would occasionally talk about some serious matters. One day, a group of people suddenly talked about the matter of human lifespan. Kui Dongshan smiled and said, "You should know that snakes shed their skin, right? Sir, you grew up in the countryside, so you should have seen quite a lot." Chen Pinggan nodded. Li Baoping, Pei Qian, and Li Huai also nodded. Kui Dongshan said with a smile, "If one's soul is the foundation, and the rest of the skin, bones, and flesh are the clothes, then, take a guess. How many clothes made of human skin will a mortal change in his life when he is 60 years old?" Pei Qian felt that this saying made her hair stand on end. Kui Dongshan smiled and stretched out a finger. Pei Qian's eyes widened. 10. Li Baoping frowned and said, 100. Li Huai was purely trying to undermine him. He liked to bicker with Li Baoping and Pei Qian. He said casually, 1,000. Kui Dongshan nodded and said, "In this life, a person will unknowingly change into 1,000 human skin clothes." Kui Dongshan continued, "In addition to those inexplicable Qi mansion acupoints that are incomparably compatible with heaven and earth, all sentient beings in the world are willing to transform into human form after becoming spirits. The imperial porcelain of your hometown's dragon kill is clearly so fragile and can't even withstand a single blow. The worst thing is to be knocked. Why did His Majesty still order people to burn it? Why didn't he directly ask for the mud on the mountain or the clay pots with a stronger physique?" Li Huai chuckled and said, "It looks good, and it's worth money." Kui Dongshan, "Why are you asking such a brainless question?" Kui Dongshan scolded, Yes, you're the only one with a brain. You look like a tiger with a tiger's head." Li Huai made a face and said cheekily, I'm not listening. Chen Pinggan smiled knowingly. One day, Chen Pinggan sat in the corridor of Kui Dongshan's courtyard. He took out the blade-strengthening gourd but did not drink. His palm pressed against the opening of the gourd and gently shook the wine pot. There was no one in the small courtyard for the time being. It was rare to have a moment of peace. After refining the 2 natal items of water and metal, refining the 3rd natal item of the 5 elements had become an unavoidable hurdle. However, according to Zhong Shanfeng, 3 natal items were enough for an ordinary qi cultivator. 1 for offense and 1 for defense. The last one could help the qi cultivator absorb spiritual energy faster. It was already quite an achievement for cultivators below the Earth Immortal realm. As for whether the number 1 and number 15 flying swords could be refined into Chen Ping'an's natal item, Kui Dongshan did not say in detail. He only said that even if the nascent Soul Realm Sword cultivator's Li Huai flying sword was successfully refined into her natal item, compared to the sword cultivator's natal flying sword, there was not much difference. However, the so-called weak was compared to the cultivators of the upper 5 realms. For an ordinary Earth Immortal Realm cultivator to have such an opportunity to seize the natal flying sword of an Earth Immortal Sword cultivator and use it for his own use, he would still be grateful. Fire, Earth, Wood. The remaining 3 natal items. Chen Ping'an had completely dispelled the idea of using the 5-colored earth of the Dali dynasty as his natal item. The old master of the Daoist temple had once asked the little Daoist boy who carried a huge gourd to pass on a message. He mentioned that Miss Wan Xiu's fire dragon could be refined. However, Chen Ping'an was not crazy. Not to mention such a crazy business, Chen Ping'an already felt helpless when he thought of Wan Tong's vigilant gaze. He was afraid that if Wan Tong knew about this idea, he would definitely be hammered into a pile of meat paste by the military saint with the hammer used to forge swords. Then, he would not think about the fire of the 5 elements first. Therefore, the last thing left was wood. Chen Ping'an actually had some plans. It was the old locust tree that had been chopped down. However, it had been divided up by the commoners at that time. The locust tree sword that had been left in the Great Wall of Sword Qi was one of the locust tree branches that he had asked the little treasure bottle to carry back. Song Jisin had mentioned the changes in his hometown. It was obvious that the people in the small town were smarter than the previous. The Baobao Zhai of Oxhorn Mountain had good judgment. They might not give Chen Ping'an a chance to pick up the leftovers. Chen Ping'an scratched his head worriedly. He lay back down. Now, he was a pure martial artist at the peak of the 5th realm. For a 2nd realm Qi refinement warrior, everything was difficult at the beginning. Chen Ping'an knew very well that it was not easy to become a 2nd realm cultivator. He was a sword immortal who carried a semi-immortal weapon. It was just that unless he fought with his life on the line, it was not easy for him to draw his sword. There were 2 flying swords in the blade strengthening gourd. His natal little Fengju's 15th sword was still okay. However, it was almost the same as Chen Ping'an's mind. Almost every day, it would clamor to eat the last and largest strip of the dragon-slaying platform. He wore a golden robe. Fortunately, it was not a problem for him to wear it before he reached the 7th realm. On the contrary, it could help him absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth quickly. To a large extent, it was equivalent to making up for the fatal flaw in Chen Ping'an's cultivation talent after the longevity bridge was broken. However, every time he used the inner vision technique to patrol his qi dwelling, the little children in green clothes condensed from water fate would still have a bitter look in their eyes. It was obvious that they were often unable to make ends meet in the spiritual energy of the underwater residents. This caused them to be in an awkward situation where they could not cook without rice. Therefore, they were especially aggrieved. On the other hand, the little person in a scholarly robe manifested from the golden gourd gave Chen Ping'an a pleasant surprise. He rode the fire dragon condensed from pure vital energy and flaunted his prowess every day. He was carefree and happy, helping Chen Ping'an to patrol his own little world. This could benefit his soul and help Chen Ping'an to expand his meridians. Moreover, some of the impurities left behind from the numerous battles of life and death, as well as the turbid and filthy aura hidden in the depths of his soul, were being ridden by the little person on the fire dragon. He was like a great general, single-handedly attacking cities and seizing strongholds. He was diligent and conscientious in cleaning up the remnants of the rebels, hidden deep in the mountains and forests. However, the little person and the fire dragon were obviously not on good terms with the group of children in green clothes who were equally diligent in running the house in the underwater residence. Both sides had already adopted a stance of not interacting with each other for the rest of their lives. After stumbling and struggling to become a chi refinement warrior, Chen Pinggan was actually at a loss for the first time. He had to make a choice. In order to survive, Chen Pinggan did not hesitate to suffer while practicing boxing and walking stances. However, now that his life was not in danger, as long as he was willing, it would not be difficult for him to immediately ascend to the sixth realm. For example, those people from wealthy families had to worry about earning gold or silver. This made Chen Pinggan very uncomfortable. Deep down, he was used to being a pauper. He always felt that the bag of copper coins in his hand or the thin layer of rice in the rice jar was what truly belonged to him. Even if he had a mountain of gold and silver beside him, he still felt that it was his today. Once he woke up, it would be someone else's tomorrow. Chen Pinggan knew that this was not right. However, a leopard could not change its spots. In this matter, he could not say that he had made no progress, but ultimately, progress was slow. In fact, Chen Pinggan knew that many things had changed a lot in the past few years. For example, he felt awkward when he changed into boots instead of straw sandals. He almost could not walk. For example, when he wore a golden robe and a jade hairpin, he always felt that he was the kind of monkey that was described in the books. For the dream that he had once told Lu Tai, he would spend a lot of money on useless things, hoping that one day, he would have a new family with a big business in Longquan County. Chen Pinggan crossed his legs and shook them gently. The little lotus flower peeked out from the ground sneakily, darting up the stairs in a flash. In the end, it climbed onto Chen Pinggan's legs and sat down. Chen Pinggan stretched out a finger and placed it by his mouth, indicating that it should not speak. Ever since Kui Dongshan first appeared in that village in Qingwan country, the little lotus flower peeked out almost no more. This was what Chen Pinggan wanted it to do. Although it did not understand, it still did as it was told. The little lotus flower peeked out with only one arm and covered its mouth, nodding vigorously with a smile. Chen Pinggan swung his legs. The little fellow looked like it was on a swing. If it was not for the fact that it was covering its mouth, it would have already giggled out loud. As soon as he saw the cheerful little lotus flower peeked out, Chen Pinggan's state of mind became much more peaceful. All the distracting thoughts and worries were swept away. Chen Pinggan closed his eyes. Not long after, he realized that the back of his feet was light. He turned his head and opened his eyes to look. The little fellow was imitating him and lying down with its legs crossed. After being discovered by Chen Pinggan, it smiled and squinted its eyes. Chen Pinggan lay down on his side, and it followed suit. Chen Pinggan began to shake its head. It seemed to be muttering something, but it did not make a sound. The little fellow followed suit, imitating Chen Pinggan. One big and one small, actually, neither of them knew what they were muttering. Chen Pinggan did not know. Kui Dongshan was just outside the walls of the small courtyard. His head was leaning against the wall, and his body was like a slope. Kui Dongshan knew why Chen Pinggan deliberately let the little lotus flower peeking out from him. Because in Chen Pinggan's eyes, the carefree little lotus flower peeking out was already the best. He didn't even want to know, nor was he willing to know, whether or not the little lotus figure was actually very rare, whether or not it was priceless, and whether or not it was of great use. Therefore, Kui Dongshan felt a little uncomfortable holding it in. Because he really wanted to tell Chen Pinggan that that little fellow was really not simple. But for some reason, Kui Dongshan pondered over it. Although he knew that whether he told Chen Pinggan or not, the end result would be the same, Kui Dongshan thought about it and suddenly felt that it was not a bad idea to not tell him. After Kui Dongshan thought of this, his face was full of smiles. He returned to his normal state, gently knocked his head back, stood up straight, and quietly floated forward. If there is unhappiness in life, it is only because you do not know my husband. Kui Dongshan was very happy at that moment. Because as long as he took this sentence to Little Treasure Bottle to claim credit, he might be able to avoid being slapped in the future. ZH. Hence, Kui Dongshan ran away and arrived outside the window of the school. He winked at the little girl in the red dress. In the end, he was shouted at by the teacher. First set a small goal, such as 1 second. Remember, book guest house, 8. 417. Unknowingly, summer had turned to autumn. After this period of nourishment, Chen Pinggan diligently made up for his lack of strength. The Qi residence where the two natal items were placed was full of spirit energy. Chen Pinggan tried his best not to favor one over the other when it came to the practice of punching and refining Qi. However, as he became a real Qi refinement warrior, he had to spend at least 8 hours a day breathing and expelling. Chen Pinggan was increasingly clear about the arrival of the bottleneck in the future. One day, he would have to make another choice to become a pure martial artist of the 7th realm and then advance to the 5th realm of Qi refinement warrior. Maro Xiaodong joked one day, "When you were cultivating in Kui Dongshan's courtyard, I didn't see you feeling sorry for the academy's spirit energy. Why were you unwilling to take any more spirit energy when you were at the peak of Donghua Mountain? Aren't you being too pretentious?" Chen Pinggan replied, "After the big rules are followed, I can talk about how when in Rome do as the Romans do. Kui Dongshan, thank you. Lin Shuyi, in this courtyard, one can rely on one's own state to absorb spirit energy. Moreover, the Academy has tacitly acknowledged that there is no wrong action. Naturally, I can do so too. This is probably like, the Donghua Mountain outside the small courtyard is the vast world. However, in this courtyard, it has become a country and a land. It is a small world. Under the premise that there is nothing that goes against my conscience or the Confucian etiquette, I am, you." Chen Pinggan spoke intermittently because he often had to pause and think for a moment before continuing. Maro Xiaodong nodded. It seemed that the words that he had painstakingly said when he was refining items at the peak of Donghua Mountain were not in vain. Maro Xiaodong asked again, "The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. Those who are above the crowd will be criticized. What do you think is the reason?" Chen Pinggan replied, "The original intention should be to warn a gentleman to know how to hide and adapt to a world that is not so good. As for why it is not good, I can't tell. I only feel that it is far from the world in the mind of the Confucians. As for why it is so, I don't understand. Moreover, I feel that this sentence is a little problematic. It is easy to lead people astray. They are always afraid of the tallest tree in the forest and do not dare to be above the crowd. Instead, it makes many people feel that it is something that everyone is doing. Since everyone is doing it, then I will do it. Anyway, the law does not punish the majority. But once I look into this matter, I seem to be entangled with the Romans. Although it can be divided, I still feel that it is still very difficult. It should be because I have not found the fundamental method." This time, Chen Pinggan was still stumbling over his words. Therefore, Chen Pinggan could not help but ask curiously, "It is undeniable that this kind of so-called golden jade advice, which is respected by the world, can indeed save people from many difficulties. Just like how I often use it to save people from trouble, but can it really be recognized as a rule by the Confucian sages?" Maro Xiaodong laughed but did not give an answer. Maro Xiaodong then changed the topic. "What do you think of the white horse is not a horse?" Chen Pinggan replied, "Kui Dongshan once talked about this. He said that it was because when the sages first created words, they were not perfect enough. The great Tao was inevitably incomplete, and it was an invisible word barrier. As time passed, the later generations created more and more words. It was a difficult problem at that time, but now it is very easy to solve. The white horse is naturally a type of horse, but it is not the same as a horse." The pitiful ancient people could only go around and around the word not. According to Kui Dongshan's words, this is also called the vain barrier. If you do not understand this, no matter how many words there are, it is useless. For example, if someone says a correct thing, and another person uses another correct thing to deny the previous correct thing, the other person is not willing to get to the bottom of it. When the other person hears it, they are not willing to get to the bottom of it. They will subconsciously think that the former is wrong. This is considered a vain barrier. There are many generalizations, confusing the order, and they do not understand the ins and outs. Kui Dongshan was quite angry about this. He said that scholars, even sages, gentlemen, and sages, could not escape this disaster. He also said that everyone in the world should learn this when they are young. This is the foundation of standing, and it is more effective than any high or low principle. Kui Dongshan also said that at least half of the sage's writings are unclear. Only by understanding this can one be qualified to comprehend the fundamental knowledge of the sage ancestor and the sage of rites. Otherwise, ordinary scholars may seem to be diligently studying the sage's writings, but in the end, they can only build a pavilion in the sky. At most, they can only float in the White Emperor city amidst the colorful clouds. Maro Xiaodong thought carefully and said with a smile, "It's not all that little bastard's words to vent his anger. It's still a bit chewy." Chen Pinggan said with a smile, "If Kui Dongshan is willing to say it, I will just listen." After all, the sage of literature once said that it is always good to think more about everything. Even if the final conclusion is negative, it is not a waste of time. Maro Xiaodong clapped and laughed. "Teacher is brilliant." Then, Maro Xiaodong looked expectant, hoping that this little junior brother of his had some understanding. Chen Pinggan held back his laughter and understood. He said, "If I can see the sage of literature next time, I will talk more about Mountain Master Mao." Maro Xiaodong said softly, remember, don't be reserved. My husband doesn't buy it. For example, if I say my husband is brilliant, you can say it exactly as it is. Even if you add some details, it's okay, but you can't play tricks." Chen Pinggan said that he would remember. In the end, Maro Xiaodong gave Chen Pinggan a flying sword message from the cloud-splitting mountain in Dallas Longquan County. Maro Xiaodong left. Some of the people in charge of Cliff Academy were shaken and needed him to calm them down. From time to time, he would chat with Chen Pinggan. Not only was it to put on the airs of a senior brother, but it was also a way for him to take a break from his busy schedule. Of course, it was also his duty as a senior brother to check on Chen Pinggan's state of mind. Chen Pinggan opened it and saw the familiar handwriting of the Northern Mountain principal god, Wei Pai. Previously, Chen Pinggan had sent a letter to Wei Pai, asking about the sale of the mountain in the west. Chen Pinggan had a natural trust in Wei Pai, the earliest and only surviving mountain principal god of divine water nation. In the letter, Wei Pai told Chen Pinggan that there were a total of 9 mountains, including the Shu family in Clearwind City, looking for a buyer. Ruan Teng, the Li family in Fulu Street, and a few other families had taken over. For now, there were only 2 mountains left. If Chen Pinggan wanted them, he could help negotiate the price. Moreover, Wei Pai suggested that although the remaining 2 mountains were leftovers, Chen Pinggan would not suffer a loss if he bought them. He also complained that Chen Pinggan did not send the letter earlier. Otherwise, he could have bought the entire Oxhorn Mountain. Even if Chen Pinggan did not have enough money in his pocket, he, Wei Pai, could pay for it first. The 2 of them would divide the Oxhorn Mountain. Oxhorn Mountain had a bundle shop, which was equivalent to a half-sold, half-given immortal fairy. Chen Pinggan read the letter again. After ensuring that he did not miss any hidden secrets, he kept it in his Fengsuan object. In the mountains to the west of Longquan County, there were many top immortal residences with abundant spiritual energy that did not lose out to the Aquarius continent. This was true, but the fate of the mountains and rivers were severely divided. Moreover, the territory was still too small. For those immortal sects and clans that could easily cover a radius of 100 miles, or even 1,000 miles, those Longquan mountains that covered a radius of more than 10 miles were difficult to achieve. Of course, it was more than enough to worship a golden core earth immortal. Chen Pinggan felt that buying the mountain was feasible. He went to Maro Xiaodong's study and wrote a letter, asking Wei Pai to discuss the price first. He asked Pei Qian to run an errand and pass it to an old teacher in the academy who was in charge of this matter. Sitting in the antique study, Chen Pinggan thought of a recent chat, where Kui Dongshan casually talked about the debate between Buddhism and Taoism in Qingwan country. Previously, he mentioned to Chen Pinggan that there were not many proper books about the 100 schools of thought. Therefore, he casually asked Chen Pinggan to go to the academy's library to find the few classics of Buddhism and Taoism. Chen Pinggan hesitated for a moment and left the study. After waiting for Lin Shuyi to finish his qi refinement, he pulled him to the library. On the way, Lin Shuyi asked with a smile, "That matter, you still haven't thought of an answer?" Chen Pinggan was stunned for a moment. Then, He remembered that it was the first time he visited Lin Shuyi in the academy, and the latter said that he was grateful. Chen Pinggan smiled bitterly. I really can't guess. I'm very curious. Don't play riddles with me. If you don't tell me, I'll definitely ask you directly before I leave the academy. Lin Shuyi smiled. Do you still remember that time when the mountain path was muddy and Li Huai was rolling on the ground and everyone was annoyed? Chen Pinggan thought for a moment. I vaguely remember. Later, I promised to make Li Huai a bookcase. Only then did he stop crying and stop making trouble. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be able to travel for a while. But in these few years, Li Huai has become much more sensible. Lin Shuyi asked, then do you still remember what you said to me at that time? Chen Pinggan hesitated for a moment. Lin Shuyi smiled. I know you definitely remember. Chen Pinggan sighed. You really care about such a small thing? Lin Shuyi nodded. At that time, I was the most unsociable. Li Baoping called you youngest uncle. Li Huai was the closest to you. Even Alliance liked to chat with them. Zhu Lu and Zhu He were father and daughter. Only I, Lin Shuyi, seemed to be the most unsociable. Although I didn't seem to care, how could I say that I wasn't disappointed at all? So, for a long time, I actually doubted whether I should go to the Great Sui Kingdom with you to study. When Lin Shuyi talked about this cultivation jade, who was serious in speech and manner in the academy, actually had a warm smile. Then you squatted on the muddy road and turned to me and said, I'll make one for you too. Anyway, it's convenient. Lin Shuyi walked slowly, so I agreed at that time. Chen Pinggan laughed. I didn't think much at that time. I just thought that if I didn't say so, you definitely wouldn't accept it. But at that time, I made a bookcase for Li Huai, but only you didn't. I was worried that you would alienate Little Treasure Bottle and Li Huai. To be honest, at that time, I considered your feelings, but more than that, I thought that among the three of you, Lin Shuyi was the oldest and had a stable temperament. When I went to the academy and left, I hoped that you could take care of them more. Lin Shuyi nodded and said, I actually understood this on the road. But there's one thing that I do well, that is, when others are kind to me, I won't feel unjust because they are more kind to others. Lin Shuyi's smile widened. He said, later on the ferry crossing the river, you made Li Huai's small book chest first, and then mine became the last one you made. Naturally, the bamboo chest that you, Chen Pinggan, were most familiar with became the best one in all of them. At that time, I knew that Chen Pinggan was a man of few words, but he was actually a good person. So when we went to the academy, Li Huai was bullied. Although I didn't do much, I didn't hide. You know, at that time, I had already seen my own path of cultivation. So I bet all my future and prepared for the worst. At worst, I would be beaten up and cut off my path of cultivation. Then I would continue to be an illegitimate child that even my parents looked down on. But first, I had to be a person that Chen Pinggan wouldn't look down on. Chen Pinggan nodded and said, I remember all these. Lin Shuyi smiled and said, so after the nascent soul sword cultivator assassinated the courtyard, Chen Pinggan came to the courtyard and sat beside me on purpose. I knew, and so did you, Chen Pinggan. In fact, except for that stupid Li Huai, even Pei Qian, everyone in the courtyard knew. Why did you sit beside me alone? You were afraid that I, Lin Shuyi, would only be able to watch from the beginning to the end of the battle. So you must feel disappointed and afraid that I, Lin Shuyi, would be further and further away from you. Chen Pinggan stopped and didn't deny it. He asked with a smile, then do you know what I am most grateful for? Now it's your turn to guess. Lin Shuyi directly shook his head and said, I'm a stubborn person. I don't think too much about other things. In this aspect, I'm worlds apart from you, Chen Pinggan. I definitely won't be able to guess. Chen Pinggan didn't keep him in suspense and said, you once told me that not all parents in the world are like Chen Pinggan's parents. Lin Shuyi was a bit puzzled. Chen Pinggan stretched out a fist and a finger and said with a smile, first of all, I'm very happy that you, Lin Shuyi, are willing to say such words. It shows that you treat me as a friend. After all, your identity has always been the biggest knot in your heart. Chen Pinggan stretched out a second finger and said, I've always remembered these words. So much so that after my trip to the Lotus Blossom Blessed Land, I was able to come here with Pei Chen. It's all thanks to these words of yours. Chen Pinggan finally stretched out a third finger and said, and after hearing these words, I'm like a pauper who suddenly found out that he had inherited a large fortune. When I think of this, I feel that no matter how rich my peers are, such as Fan Er who became my friend later on, or Liu Yuju who never became my friend, when I get along with them, I don't feel ashamed of my inferiority when it comes to whether they are rich or not. Lin Shuyi smiled and then said, I guess that Song Jisin hates you the most. Chen Pinggan nodded. Chen Pinggan stopped in front of the library and looked up at the tall building. Lin Shuyi, I'm very happy that you value and cherish my insignificant kindness so much. Lin Shuyi said, in this world, even good people like to ask for good people, so you have to cherish a friend like me. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, I will. Lin Shuyi asked, then you don't have to haggle over whether I return the gifts you give me in the future. Chen Pinggan waved his hand and put his arm around Lin Shuyi's shoulder. Don't even think about it. Lin Shuyi nimbly pushed Chen Pinggan away and straightened his clothes, complaining, if the girls of the academy see this scene, I might lose a few admirers. Of course I don't like them, but I don't hate them for liking me either. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, in my opinion, you, Lin Shuyi, have changed the most in the academy these years. Lin Shuyi and Chen Pinggan looked at each other and both thought of a certain person. Then, for some reason, they laughed heartily together. This was probably the telepathy between friends. The two people from the same hometown talked and laughed as they walked into the library together. Countless principals in the books were waiting for them to read an extract. At the bamboo house of Luopa Mountain, the little boy in green had just finished a farewell drink with his friends in the town's restaurant. The girl in pink sat on a bamboo chair and ate melon seeds. She found that he seemed to be a little dispirited and asked, didn't you drink to your heart's content with your brother, the Imperial River Water God? Or is the drink too expensive? The little boy in green sat on the bamboo chair beside her and held his chin with both hands. You don't understand, Jiang, who matters. The girl in pink stretched out her hand and poured some melon seeds for him. The little boy in green did not refuse. Previously, the Imperial River Water God of the Huangting country had successfully obtained an incomparably valuable peace token through the little boy in green. Then, with the permission of the Ministry of Rights of the Huangting country, he left the country and crossed the border of Dali to visit Luopa Mountain. The little boy in green brought his best brother of the Jianghu to many places. The girl in pink guessed that this guy had bragged a lot in front of the water god. After the little boy in green finished eating the melon seeds, he groaned and scratched his ears and cheeks. Then, he calmed down instantly. His legs were straight and he was listless as he leaned on the bamboo chair and said slowly, the righteous gods of the rivers are divided into different grades and ranks. When we were drinking, my brother said that he saw the highest-ranked river god of the Tiefu River and was very envious. He wanted me to put in a good word with the Dali Imperial Court to include some tributary rivers under his jurisdiction. Then, did he give you some divine money to build connections? Not yet. The girl in pink had a strange look in her eyes. The little boy in green glared at her and said angrily, it's not that my brother is stingy. He said it himself that it's unreasonable to talk about money between brothers. I think that's reasonable. Now, I'm just worried about which temple I should enter and which bodhisattva's incense. You know that Wei Pai has always disliked me. The last time I went to him, he kept making excuses. He doesn't care about brotherhood and friendship. The words of the mountain god with a golden head at the top of our mountain are useless. County Governor Wu Yuan, the county magistrate with the surname Yuan, I've also been rejected before. But that Shu Ruo, the swordsman who gave each of us a peace token, I think there's a chance. It's just that I can't find him. The girl in pink chewed on the melon seeds and asked softly, even if you find the temple, do you have the money? The little boy in green was not confident that Shu Ruo might not take money from me. You see, Shu Ruo has a good relationship with our master, how can he take money from me? If there's no other way, I'll owe him first and borrow money from our master to pay back Shu Ruo. Is that okay? The girl in pink got angry and said angrily, what's wrong with you? Why are you always thinking about our master's money? The little boy in green muttered, a penny stumps a hero. What's so strange about that? Who hasn't fallen on hard times? Besides, isn't this place called Luopa Mountain? It's our master's fault for choosing such a mountain. The name is inauspicious. The girl in pink got even angrier. How can you blame our master for this? Has your conscience been eaten by a dog? If it was any other matter, the little boy in green would have been furious if she dared to talk to him like that. But today, the little boy in green did not even want to be angry. He could not muster up any energy. At this moment, Wei Pai, who rarely came to Luopa Mountain in the past year, appeared on the road and slowly walked over. The little boy in green jumped up and ran over. He said flatteringly, "Great righteous God Wei, how come you have time to visit my house today? Are you tired from walking? Do you want to sit on the bamboo chair and let me massage your shoulders and legs for you?" Wei Pai reached out and pressed the little boy's head. "Go away." The little boy in green grabbed one of Wei Pai's sleeves with both hands. In the end, he was dragged by Wei Pai to the pond behind the bamboo building. The girl in pink shook her head. It was really embarrassing for her master. Wei Pai squatted beside the pond with clear water. The golden lotus seed had already begun to sprout. The little boy in green squatted beside him. "Old immortal Wei, can I discuss something with you?" Wei Pai stared at the extremely precious seed. After all, it was one of the relics left behind by the Taoist sect leader Lu Chen in this world. This was also the reason why the Divine Water Country was still connected to the country even though it had been severed for so long. It was also the reason why Wei Pai had set his eyes on the Tiefu River's righteous god, Yang Hua. As the only remaining god of the Divine Water Country, Wei Pai was able to escape from the calamity back then. He was at death's door until he became the righteous god of the Dali dynasty. Of course, Wei Pai's own forbearance was also very important. If he did not save himself, the heavens would not save him. Wei Pai's tone was indifferent. His words directly dispelled the little boy in green's hopes of getting lucky. "That Imperial River water god treats you like a fool. Are you so happy being a fool?" The green-clothed child angrily got up and walked a few steps away. He turned his head and saw that Wei Bai's back was facing him. He stood where he was and began to kick and punch the eyesore's back before he hurriedly ran away. Before Wei Pai left Luopa Mountain, he smiled at the two little fellows sitting on the bamboo chair and said, "Your master will be back soon." Wei Pai swaggered off. The girl in pink was extremely excited. But for some reason, when she turned her head, she found that the little boy in green, who should have been as happy as her, was sitting on the bamboo chair in a daze. She asked softly, "What's wrong?" The little boy in green murmured, "You're already so stupid. In the end, I was still called a fool by Wei Pai. Do you think our master will be very disappointed when he sees us this time?" The girl in pink stood up angrily. She no longer paid attention to this fellow who treated her kindness as ill intent. She went to get a bucket of water and a rag and began to carefully wipe the bamboo house. The little boy in green bent over and held his cheeks. He had once looked forward to a scene. That was, when the Imperial River Water God brothers came to Luopa Mountain as guests, he could confidently sit on the side and drink, watching Chen Pingan and his brothers, regretting that they had not met earlier, calling each other brothers and exchanging toasts. In that case, he would be very proud. After the banquet, when he returned to Luopa Mountain with Chen Pingan, he could boast to him about his Jianghu deeds and how glorious he was on Imperial River's side. But he realized that it was a little difficult. The little boy in green was a little disappointed. He looked down at the melon seed shells on the ground. It seemed that there were a few fish that had escaped the net. The bored little boy in green picked them up and ate them. It seemed that the taste was better than usual. The girl in pink, who was wiping the stairs of the bamboo house, happened to see this scene. She asked in surprise, "Are you already so poor? Don't tell me you gave all your family's assets to your Imperial River Water God brothers?" The little boy in green's mood had improved a lot. He rolled his eyes at her. "I'm not stupid. Don't you know how to leave some for your wife? I don't want to become an old bachelor like old Kui. You don't know how precious money is when you're young, so you should obediently be a bachelor when you're old. This principle, when our master returns home, I will also tell him, lest he still likes to be a child of wealth." There was a bang. The little boy in green was sent flying out of the cliff. The girl in pink was already used to this and was not worried about his safety. A long green snake suddenly appeared, riding on the clouds. Then, it climbed up the cliff and returned to the appearance of the little boy in green, swaggering toward the bamboo house. Honest words are unpleasant to the ear. No wonder loyal officials and good generals have such a hard time meeting a good end since ancient times. There was another bang. The little boy in green was sent flying again. When he returned to the top of the mountain for the second time, he saw a barefoot old man in scholarly robes standing on the second floor of the bamboo house. The little boy in green immediately shouted, "Old Kui, I didn't say anything this time." He was sent flying down the cliff again. The girl in pink was already wiping the railing on the second floor, somewhat puzzled. The old man surnamed Kui smiled, "Your skin is itching for a beating. You'll remember." The girl in pink was unable to refute and did not plead for mercy for the little boy in green. On the mountain path of Luorpa Mountain, the little boy in green cursed as he ran up the mountain. On that isolated island in the sea near the central divine continent. On this day, the scholarly man rejected yet another visitor, causing a grand chancellor of the secondary saint lineage to be shut out. If this was before, even if the scholarly man was unwilling to open the door, he would still show his face. This time, he did not even show his face. The Grand Chancellor could only leave in disappointment. He could not help but feel anxious in the depths of his heart. He did not know why that scholar was so unreasonable this time. The scholarly man stood in the thatched house where Zhao Yarrow had lived back then. There was a path on the mountain of books. He stood in one corner, flipping through a Confucian book that he had casually pulled out. The Confucian sage who wrote this book had already lost his literary vein. As he had died in the river of time at a young age without any warning, his disciple had yet to truly grasp the essence of the literary vein. In less than 100 years, his literary legacy was severed. He put down the book and walked out of the thatched house. He came to the top of the mountain and continued to gaze at the sea. How did Zhao Yarrow come here back then? It was because of the protection of a remnant soul. Otherwise, even a Grand Heavenly Master of Mount Longhu and a Grand Chancellor of the Academia had to first knock on the door before entering. How could Zhao Yarrow have just gone with the flow and arrived here by coincidence? He retracted his gaze and looked at the cliff. Back then, Zhao Yarrow had been there, wanting to take a step out. Of course, he did not care. It was just that at that time, there was a middle-aged Confucian with white hair on his temples who had winked at him. Only then did he persuade Zhao Yarrow. After Zhao Yarrow had left the island, he had a conversation with the Confucian who had sent Zhao Yarrow here. He asked, "Since you care so much, why don't you show yourself to him?" That person replied, "Zhao Yarrow is still young. If he sees me, he will only feel more guilty. Some of the knots in his heart need to be untied by himself. After walking a long path, he will think it through sooner or later." He asked, "Then Qi Jing-chun, are you not afraid that Zhao Yarrow will not know your thoughts even when he dies? Zhao Yarrow's talent is not bad. It won't be difficult for him to establish a sect in the central divine continent. You have stripped away the literary qi from your life-bound characters and only used the purest qi of heaven and earth to hide it in the wooden dragon paperweight. You are waiting for the day when Zhao Yarrow's heart will blossom again. Are you not afraid that Zhao Yarrow will benefit other literary lineages, or even Taoism?" Qi Jing-chun replied, "It doesn't matter. It's fine as long as this student of mine is alive. Whether or not he inherits my literary lineage is not that important compared to Zhao Yarrow being able to peacefully pursue his studies for the rest of his life." He sighed, "Qi Jing-chun, it's a pity for you." Qi Jing-chun only smiled at that time and did not say anything. At this moment, this scholar of the central divine continent who had once split open the Yellow River Paradise with a single sword felt that there was one less close friend in life. Aquarius Continent, Mount Yunxia. Cai Qin-chien, who had already occupied a mountain residence by himself, was cultivating on the Pu. After opening her eyes, she stood up and walked to the viewing platform with a wide view. Fairy Cai, who had been progressing triumphantly on the path of cultivation and whose temperament had become colder and colder, seemed to have thought of something and smiled. Back then, There was a scholar whom she admired and respected the most. When he gave her the first painting of the River of Time, he did something that made Cai Chin-chien feel like the world had turned upside down. Mr. Chi, who was perfect in her heart, actually asked a student for advice. He asked her sincerely, "If you send this painting to the Great Wall of Sword Chi, will it be superfluous? Will it not be beautiful?" Cai Chin-chien could still remember clearly how she felt at that time. It was almost like a nascent soul cultivator going through a tribulation. She was struck by lightning. After Mr. Chi saw her dazed expression, he laughed and said, "When it comes to the matters between men and women in the world, I really know 6 out of 7 orifices, but I know none of them." Cai Chin-chien kept a straight face and tried her best to keep it straight. Chi Jing-chun said helplessly, "If you want to laugh, just laugh." In the end, Cai Chin-chien didn't laugh. Deep in her heart, she was a little sad. She looked at Mr. Chi in a daze. After coming back to her senses, Cai Chin-chien gave her answer. "If you don't like it, doing this may not be useful. It doesn't matter whether it's superfluous or not. If you already like it a little, you might like it even more after seeing it." At that time, after hearing Cai Chin-chien's words, Mr. Chi seemed to have a lot of burden on his shoulders. He immediately smiled. Mr. Chi's smile at that time made Cai Chin-chien feel that no matter how knowledgeable this man was, he was still in the human world. Cai Chin-chien leaned on the railing and smiled. She was looking into the distance, but in fact, the spectacular scenery outside the viewing platform was not in her eyes. Secretly liking such a man, even if she knew that he wouldn't like her, Cai Chin-chien felt that it was the most beautiful thing. On the path of cultivation, no matter if it was 100 years or 1,000 years in the future, Cai Chin-chien was willing to think of him in the quiet moments when there was no one around. In the middle of the Aquarius continent, there was an immortal ferry that connected to the southern border of the Zhuang dynasty. Liu Qingshan bought a big pot of wine and sat by the river. He drank big mouthfuls after mouthfuls. Liu Boqi knew that this day would come sooner or later, but she didn't expect it to come so soon. First, there was a conflict with a qi cultivator, which was a small matter. Then, there was an even bigger nightmare, which was the farce in Qingwan country. She took the wine pot from Liu Qingshan's hand and said in a low voice, "I've barely studied, so I can't say anything. You're a scholar, so you might not listen to me. But no matter what, I hope you know something." Liu Boqi, the female champion of the saber division, held the wine pot with one hand and pressed the saber at her waist with the other. Her expression was sharp. There are many stupid and bad people in the world. It has nothing to do with how many books they've studied. When they meet a little good person or thing, they will hate it so much that they will either own it or destroy it. In the future, if you're willing to talk to such people about your principles, just say it. But if it doesn't make sense in the end, I'll do it. Liu Qingshan just kept shaking his head, shaking it with all his might. "I understand all of this. I just want to know why Big Brother did that. I want to talk to my most respected Big Brother about my principles as a son. What should I do? I know that I'm not as good as Big Brother in all aspects. I just want to go home and talk to him about this. Is that okay?" Liu Boqi shook her head for the first time. She had always gone along with Liu Qingfeng, but she didn't give in to Liu Qingfeng on this matter. "Don't talk about this. You'd better bear with it." Liu Qingshan murmured, "Why?" Liu Boqi said, "I don't know the reasons and principles behind this matter. I also don't want to talk nonsense to ease your mind. But I know that your big brother will only be in more pain than you right now. If you feel that rubbing salt on his wound will make you happy, you can go. I won't stop you, but I will look down on you. So Liu Qingshan is such a good-for-nothing. His heart is even smaller than a woman's." Liu Qingshan's face was blank. Liu Boqi was a little nervous. She asked directly, "Did I say it too harshly?" Liu Qingshan stared at her blankly for a long time. Then, he suddenly laughed. He wiped his tears and snot away. "It's okay." Liu Boqi then returned the wine pot to Liu Qingshan. "You can drink now." Liu Qingshan didn't stand on ceremony. He took the wine pot and gulped down the wine. He drank until he vomited by the river. Liu Boqi patted his back gently. "If you still want to drink, I'll buy more for you. Liu Qingshan shook his head gently. In the end, Liu Boqi carried Liu Qingshan on her back and walked on the street in front of everyone. On the road outside a county of Qingwan country, after the heavy rain, it was muddy and puddles of water formed. A carriage driven by an old man from the county office slowed down. After a while, it sped up and rushed towards the county. Sitting in the carriage with the county magistrate he glanced at Liu Qingfeng, who was resting with his eyes closed. Wang He was one of the 2 people that the imperial tutor, Kui Dong, secretly sent into Qingwan country. Now, he was the county magistrate in name, but he was actually Liu Qingfeng's secretary to prevent some assassinations. From this, one could see how much Kui Dong valued this county magistrate of a small country. Wang He knew that there were a few women and children walking on the road behind the carriage. Wang He also closed his eyes. He, the fallen general of the Liu dynasty, finally started to look forward to what position this Qingwan civil servant could reach in the Dali imperial court. The northern border of the Zhuiying dynasty. Chaos was everywhere. On a mountain road, there were a few immortal masters from small sects. They hid their identities and pretended to be mountain cultivators. They had already set their eyes on a convoy of officials who were escaping to the south. They were coincidentally met by Ma Kushuan. One of the Qi refinement warriors was dragging a beautiful woman out of the carriage by her hair. He said that he wanted to have a taste of the county magistrate's wife. At first, Ma Kushuan did not want to interfere. He continued on his own path. In the end, he was stopped by a Qi refinement warrior. Ma Kushuan killed 1.5 with 2 punches. The last person fled in panic. Ma Kushuan ignored him. The pitiful Qi refinement warrior was half dead. Ma Kushuan stepped on his chest. Ma Kushuan smiled and said, "Is this how a bad person should be? If you are a bad person, you should at least have some judgment. Do you still need me to teach you this?" Ma Kushuan stepped on that person's chest. Ma Kushuan continued on his way. He did not expect that among the relatives of the disheveled woman, there was a young man who felt extremely humiliated. He angrily asked Ma Kushuan why he did not kill the last person. Was this not nurturing a tiger and inviting calamity? Ma Kushuan killed that young man with a punch. Only then did he pass through the silent convoy. He only said, "Stupid people who commit stupidity deserve to die more than bad people." After he left, the military cultivator from the Marshall Mountain appeared. He frowned and said, "That ignorant young man did not deserve to die." Ma Kushuan smiled and said, "Everyone should have died. Shouldn't you thank me for being chivalrous for once?" The woman lay on her son's corpse and wailed. She was filled with hatred and fear towards that crazy young man who did not care about human lives. The immortal sect closest to the capital of the Li dynasty, Changcheng. It was very quiet. The security was tight. Prince Song He and his mother stood at the top of the mountain. They smiled and asked, "Uncle, are you trying to usurp the throne?" Song He quickly shook his head and said, "But is there a need to go through so much trouble? Can't you just directly carry out an assassination? Can't the death warriors of the Great Sui Kingdom and the remnants of the Liu dynasty do the job?" "Mother, I think that at this moment, not to mention the Dali border army, even in the imperial court, there are many people who are urging Uncle to ascend the throne. Those who side with me and Mother are mostly civil officials. They are not of much use." The Dali woman who had lost all her power smiled and said, Don't underestimate your uncle. His heart is big, and he doesn't care about the dragon throne." Song He did not believe it. Whether or not he cared about it was one thing. In the secular dynasty, who would care about the butt of the dragon throne? The woman comforted him, "The people of Dali can be used." Song He turned his head and said, "The people of the people? Mother, didn't you always say that those people are ignorant ants?" The woman covered her mouth and laughed. "It's fine for us mother and son to talk about such things. But in other situations, remember, if you know, but you cannot say it. In the future, when you become the emperor of a continent, you also have to learn to pretend to be stupid. It's the same with the wise and mighty uncle, and it's also the same with the civil and military officials." Song He asked, "Then what about the people on the mountain?" The woman was actually a little hesitant. Song, he said, I actually don't understand why father always wants to compete with those immortals. If I were a chi cultivator, especially when my realm is high, who would be willing to be restrained by a human monarch? If I really become the emperor in the future, if I change the established national policy, do you think there will be more immortal forces who will surrender to me and surround my dragon throne? Maybe I can rely on this to gradually balance the imperial tutor and uncle? The short but extremely exquisite woman in the palace dress sighed, don't say such stupid things in the future. It's best not to even think about it. Song, he said, okay, I'll listen to mother. The woman smiled sweetly. He was the most likable in this aspect. He was obedient, so mother and son were of the same mind. As for the other one, she deliberately did not let herself think too much. Dragon Spring Sword Sect. Ruan Xiao stood in her courtyard, eating the pastries bought from Dragon Riding Alley. In the courtyard, the chicks grew into hens and gave birth to a nest of chicks. The number of chicks and hens increased. That Sanxian, who had been enlightened, showed signs of taking over the mountain and acting wildly in the mountains in the west. Fortunately, it had suffered before and did not dare to be too presumptuous. When it saw people in the streets, it would obediently tuck its tail between its legs. Ruan Xiao finished eating the pastries, put away the embroidered handkerchief, and clapped her hands. She swept up. She came to the cliff where someone had carved the words Tian Kai Shen Xiao. She walked down from the top of the cliff. When she reached the bottom of the cliff, she went back the way she came. On this day, Chen Pinggan took Li Baoping and Pei Qian to the capital of the Great Sui Kingdom for a stroll. Kui Dongshan stood in his study and glanced at the immortal scrolls that were casually piled up. Then, he looked at the books that Chen Pinggan had borrowed from the library. There were also Chen Pinggan's carving knife and a few bamboo slips on the desk. They were all for the convenience of copying the words on the books. They were not put away. Kui Dongshan was a little happy. Li Baoping, Pei Qian, and Li Huai treated this place as their own territory. Didn't Chen Pinggan have such signs? However, Kui Dongshan was still in a bad mood today. For no reason, Kui Dongshan was even more helpless. Whatever he could do, he had done it both openly and secretly. But it still seemed very difficult. He left the study and sat cross-legged on the green bamboo corridor. He pressed his palm against the floor and smiled. Little fellow, come out. Kui Dongshan suddenly raised his sleeve. A little fellow was pulled out. It was dizzy and swaying. When the little lotus figure realized that it was Kui Dongshan, it wanted to run back underground. However, it realized that no matter how it jumped, it could not do so. It wanted to run out of the corridor and try in the courtyard. However, it seemed to have hit the wall and fell back into the corridor. Kui Dongshan laughed. Little fool. The little lotus figure sat on the ground with its head drooping. Kui Dongshan looked at it. He thought of himself. Back then, when he was studying, he accompanied a poor old scholar in a poor alley. Although he was not considered a master, he was already a chi cultivator. If the old scholar had not set so many complicated rules at the beginning, how could the master and disciple be in such a miserable state? They could not even eat their fill. Then, finally, one day, he wanted to earn some money back. As for whether he would be expelled from the school by the old scholar according to the agreement, he did not care. A man could not hold his pea to death. But when he came back with a big bag of silver, the old scholar said 2 sentences expressionlessly. The first sentence was that they were no longer master and disciple. The second sentence was that he hoped that no matter where the money came from, he would send it back to where it came from. This was because the money was his disciples' ill-gotten gains. But after that, Quisha loved to swindle and rob people. He was an old elementary scholar, and couldn't even teach his first disciple well. He didn't have the ability to do so. At that time, the young Kui Dong was just like the little lotus figure now. He lowered his head and did not speak. Perhaps his mentality was very different, but his pitiful appearance was the same. Kui Dongshan remembered the young Kui Dong. He did not cry and beg the old scholar not to expel him from the school. He only said 2 sentences, I can return the silver, but I hope you can leave 1 or 2 silver ingots. He owed half a year's worth of money for his studies, so he would treat it as a quid pro quo. The second sentence was that the young Kui Dong told the old scholar to take the silver and buy a few good brushes. Even if he had some knowledge, how could he write an article if he did not want to throw away the brushes? That day, the old scholar asked Kui Dong to wait in the house with 4 bare walls. The old Shiotsai walked out of the house and sighed secretly in the shabby alley. In the end, he shamelessly borrowed some money from one of his neighbors and scolded the shrew, who didn't like his poor appearance. He said a lot of nonsense in a strange tone. The old scholar did not talk back and just smiled. The old scholar spent all the money and bought half a roast chicken wrapped in oil paper. He swaggered back to the house and did not mention anything about chasing Kui Dong away. He just asked Kui Dong to sit down and eat the roast chicken. The two of them sat across from each other at the broken table. Kui Dong ate for a while and asked the old scholar why he did not eat. The old scholar said that he had a toothache recently and could not eat greasy food. The young Kui Dong lowered his head and continued eating. He asked the old scholar, "Did you borrow money to buy a brush?" The old scholar patted his stomach and said, "Since I'm here, I can't run away. It doesn't matter if I write later, I can write more articles in one go." The young Kui Sha actually knew that the poor and pedantic scholar was just trying to hide the fact that his stomach was growling from hunger. The old scholar finally said softly, "Xiao Li, this half a roast chicken, whether it's you or me, we can only use money to buy it. But the knowledge in my teacher's stomach is untimely. You can take as much as you can. You don't have to spend money. Of course, it doesn't seem to be worth much. We scholars, as long as we don't starve to death, we still have to be reasonable." In fact, that day was the first time Kui Dong left the school of the Sage of Literature, although it was only for a short period of less than 2 hours. But later on, his junior apprentice brothers Zhuo and Qi Jingchun, as well as all the students and registered disciples of the Sage of Literature, did not know about this. Kui Dong did not say anything and the old scholar also did not say anything. Today, Kui Dong Shan used his finger to knock on the head of the little lotus and smiled, "I want to talk to you about something serious. It has to do with my teacher. Do you want to hear it?" The little guy hesitated for a long time and nodded. Kui Dong Shan slowly said, "My teacher has a mountain called Luo Po Mountain. There is a pond there and there is a golden lotus seed in it. It is very likely that it is your chance to prove your Tao. For example, you can break through the Yuanying bottleneck and become the first of the 5 realms in the Aquarius continent. At that time, Luo Po Mountain will also benefit greatly. Through you, it can stabilize and condense a large amount of Ling Qi and chance. In the matter of cultivation, there are some barriers that I think are first come first served. If you are late, you won't even have the chance to squat in the latrine." The little lotus blinked and then raised his arm and clenched his fist, probably to encourage himself. Kui Dong Shan shook his head, "But I want you to do one thing. In the future, when my teacher is not by your side and someone tells you this, when you feel that you are particularly useless, when you feel that you should do something for my teacher." Kui Dong Shan said, "Don't do it." The little lotus was even more confused. Kui Dong Shan pointed to his heart and then to the little guy and smiled, "You are the paradise in my teacher's heart." The little guy tilted his head, indicating that he did not understand. Kui Dong Shan turned his head and looked up. In you, he saw the most beautiful scene in his heart, at least one of them. How should I say it? You are like my teacher looking back at all the hardships he suffered when he was young, and produced a flower. Seeing you, my teacher will feel at ease. So in the world, he is not alone, there are also fools like him, exactly the same. And then your luck was so good, you met. Perhaps one day, due to the complicated ways of the world, my husband will be helpless and change as well. At that time, if you haven't changed, my husband will be slightly more at ease. He will change less and slower. Kui Dong Shan retracted his gaze, "But if you do as I say, you will lose a huge chance." The little lotus shook his head, as if to say that it was fine. Kui Dong Shan smiled brightly, he leaned forward and extended his little finger, "Then let's make a pinky promise." The little lotus with only one arm raised that arm and made a pinky promise with Kui Dong Shan. The difference in the size of their fingers was very interesting. Kui Dongshan bent over and smiled. Hang for 100 years, yes, if possible, 1,000 years, 10,000 years. The little guy nodded vigorously. Kui Dongshan suddenly said fiercely, if you go back on your word one day, I will beat you to death, put you on the chopping board, catcher, cut you into 8 pieces, boil soup, add onions and garlic, sprinkle oil and salt. Halfway through, Kui Dongshan laughed to himself and made a funny face. As if he was not satisfied, he stretched out his hands, opened his mouth, and made a strange face. The little lotus chuckled and simply lay on the ground, dancing with joy. Kui Dongshan also laughed heartily. In the long years after, there had always been such a little demon in Luopo Mountain. It was carefree, naive, and innocent. No matter how high Chen Pingan's achievements were in the future, every time he went out to travel and returned to his hometown, he would spend some time alone with the little guy, simply and confide in him. 418. He probably sensed that Chen Pingan's state of mind was fluctuating. Maro Xiaodong did not call Chen Pingan to the study room. Instead, he chose a quiet night and took Chen Pingan to walk around the academy. Maro Xiaodong was always like this. No matter how he acted or how he taught people, he always abided by one thing. What he taught you was his own principles. Be it the students of the academy or younger brother Chen Pingan, you should listen to it first and take it as a suggestion. It might not be suitable for you, but at least you can use it to broaden your horizons. Chen Pingan and Maro Xiaodong walked through the headmaster's hall, where the statues of the 3 sages were hung, the library, where the occasional candlelight shone, and the houses where people were either snoring or talking in their sleep. Finally, they walked to the peak of Mount Donghua and looked down at the night view of the capital city of the Great Sui Kingdom. Rich places were brightly lit and continuous. It was as if they could feel the singing and dancing even from a distance. Even in a poor and cold place, there was still moonlight to accompany them, as well as daily necessities. Chen Pingan suddenly said, Mountain Master Mao, I've thought it through. Refining the 5 natal items to gather the 5 elements is to rebuild the longevity bridge. But I still want to practice martial arts. After all, practicing martial arts is also practicing swordsmanship. As for whether I can nurture my natal flying sword and become a swordsman, let's not think about it first. So next, except for the few key aperture points that may be suitable for the natal items of the 5 elements, I will still give the pure martial genuine qi in my body to nurture as much as possible. Maro Xiaodong nodded and said, I think this plan is feasible. As for whether the final result is good or bad, don't ask about the harvest first. Just ask about the cultivation. Chen Pingan nodded. Actually, Maro Xiaodong did not say it clearly. The reason why he approved of Chen Pingan's action was that Chen Pingan only opened up 5 mansions and gave the rest of the territory to Wu Fu with both hands. It was not a dead end. The human body was a small world. In fact, there was also a saying that it was a paradise. Below the level of Jindan, all the acupoints and mansions, no matter how well you managed them, were still in the category of a paradise. Only after forming the Jindan could one have a preliminary understanding of the mysteries of the paradise. A certain Taoist classic had already stated clearly, revealing the mysteries of heaven. The cave in the mountain is connected to the heavens, connecting all the mountains, resonating with each other from afar. The qi of heaven and earth is one. Only by becoming a Jindan expert can one be considered a member of my generation. Naturally, there was a reason why this saying was so popular in the world and was regarded as a standard by all qi refinement warriors. Maro Xiaodong didn't mention it because as long as Chen Pingan moved forward step by step, he would reach that step sooner or later. If he said it too early and suddenly had a beautiful vision, it might shake Chen Pingan's state of mind that had calmed down with great difficulty. Imparting Tao had never been easy. How could one not be cautious? To carve a beautiful jade, one had to remove the impurities and preserve the essence with every cut. One must not hurt the tendons, bones, and spirit. How difficult was it? How could one not consider it carefully? Taking a step back, wasn't Chen Pingan the same way when he treated the young lady named Pei Qian? It was just that Chen Pingan might not be aware of it for the time being. Maro Xiaodong said softly, regarding the evil of human nature that teacher mentioned, All of us disciples had our own understanding in our early years. Some of us were silent like teacher, denying themselves and changing their tune. Some were hesitant and self-doubting. Some used this to fish for compliments and flaunted their own mavericks. They claimed that they wanted to go against the trend and never wallow in the mire, inheriting teacher's literary vein. With all these, the human heart is changeable. Our branch's literary vein has almost been cut off. Internally, it is already a chaotic scene with all kinds of living beings. Think about it, how complicated would it be if the sage of rites and the secondary sage had their own literary vein and truly had disciples all over the world? Chen Ping'an's shoulder was lightly patted by Maro Xiaodong. There's still a long way to go. Chen Ping'an smiled bitterly. There are only 2 shoulders. Maro Xiaodong laughed and said, "This is called watching people carry a burden without difficulty and watching the tide from the shore find the water too small." Chen Ping'an smiled knowingly. The first half of the sentence was an old saying from his hometown. That night, Pei Qian and Li Huai hid outside the small courtyard. The 2 of them agreed to put on black scarves and pretend to be assassins to secretly assassinate Kui Dongshan, who liked to sleep in the green bamboo corridor. They couldn't read so many Jianghu novels for nothing. They had to apply what they had learned. Pei Qian generously lent a bamboo sword to Li Huai. The 2 of them discussed at Li Huai's school and felt that they had to climb over the wall instead of through the gate. Otherwise, they couldn't show the demeanor of a master and the danger of Jianghu. Liu Guan and Ma Lian wanted to join and be the lackeys of Princess Pei Qian. Unfortunately, they were firmly rejected by Pei Qian, who said that they were just inexperienced young heroes and couldn't kill the big devil. They would only be courting death. The 2 of them arrived at the quiet path outside the wall of the small courtyard. Using the same path as before, Pei Qian leaped onto the top of the wall first. Then, he tossed the mountaineering staff, which had made a great contribution, to Li Huai, who was anxiously standing below. Li Huai didn't make any mistakes when he jumped on the wall. Pei Qian looked at him with admiration. Li Huai straightened his chest and stroked his hair like someone else. When the 2 of them landed, Pei Qian was as silent as a cat while Li Huai made a big noise in the middle of winter. Pei Qian said angrily, "Li Huai, what's wrong with you? Why are you making such a big noise? That's called fighting on the battlefield, not sneaking into the tiger's den to assassinate the big devil." Again, Li Huai admitted that he was in the wrong and didn't talk back. He asked in a low voice, "Then how do we leave the courtyard?" Pei Qian stared at him and said, "Go through the gate. Anyway, we've failed this time." The 2 of them left the courtyard through the unlocked gate and came to the path outside the courtyard wall. Kui Dongshan, who was lying on the other side of the corridor, rolled his eyes. Pei Qian held the mountain walking stick and said, "I'm an iron-blooded and cruel man in Jianghu." Li Huai imitated him and said, "I'm a merciful killer. I kill without blinking. I set off a bloody storm in Jianghu." Pei Qian was a little dissatisfied. "Why are you talking so much? You're losing momentum. Look at the most famous heroes in books. Their nicknames are at most 4 or 5 words. Do you think it's reasonable to have more?" Li Huai felt that it made sense. He pretended to wear a bamboo hat and imitated a certain someone. He reached out his hand to adjust the bamboo hat and held the bamboo sword at his waist with one hand. "I am a merciful killer and swordsman." The 2 of them climbed up the wall one after another. This time, they didn't make any mistakes. Then, Pei Qian and Li Huai did a roll in the courtyard one after the other. This was a premeditated step. Otherwise, they would find it too boring to just run up the steps and give Kui Dongshan a knife and a sword. After getting up from the ground, the 2 of them tiptoed up the stairs and stretched out their hands to hold down the bamboo blade and bamboo sword. Pei Qian was about to slash the notorious great devil of the Jianghu to death when Li Huai suddenly shouted, "Devil, die." Pei Qian suddenly stopped and turned to glare at Li Huai. Li Huai was stunned. "What's wrong?" Pei Qian asked, "Aren't you an assassin who comes and goes without a trace? Why would an assassin yell before killing someone?" Li Huai suddenly understood. Pei Qian stomped his foot. "We have to do it again." Li Huai apologized profusely. The 2 of them didn't care about the devil at all. The two of them ran to the courtyard gate again. Kui Dongshan sat up and said helplessly, "I'm a big devil waiting for death. I'm even more tired than you." After leaving the courtyard, Pei Qian scolded, "Li Huai, if you mess around again, I won't take you to Jianghu anymore." Li Huai promised, "It won't go wrong." Pei Qian suddenly asked, "I'm just a nominal disciple now. My position in the gang is even lower than yours. After making this contribution, do you think Bao Ping Jejie will promote me to be a small branch leader?" Li Huai nodded. "Definitely. If Li Baoping doesn't know how to reward or punish, it doesn't matter. I can give you the position of a small branch leader. I'll just be an assistant." Pei Qian said like an old man, "I didn't expect Li Huai to be such a warm-hearted true swordsman even though your martial arts are ordinary." Li Huai retorted, "Assassin, swordsman." As a result, the two of them were hit on the head by a chestnut. "It's so late. Why aren't you sleeping? What are you doing here?" Pei Qian saw that it was Chen Pinggan and immediately kicked Li Huai. Li Huai said heroically, "I invited Pei Qian to help me get rid of evil for the people and assassinate the big devil Kui Dongshan." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "Okay, the big devil will be dealt with by a swordsman with unparalleled martial arts. You two are not strong enough now. Let's talk about it later." Pei Qian took back the bamboo sword from Li Huai and went to sleep in the side room of the courtyard. Previously, he slept with Li Baoping in the school dormitory, but today was an exception. Chen Pinggan brought Li Huai back to the school dormitory. Chen Pinggan met a teacher who was patrolling the academy at night. Coincidentally, he was familiar with him. He was actually the gatekeeper with the surname Liang, a nameless nascent soul cultivator. Thus, Chen Pinggan exonerated Li Huai and found a reason to avoid punishment. The old teacher was easy to talk to and didn't mind at all. Instead, he pulled Chen Pinggan and chatted for a while. Li Huai felt very proud and wished that everyone in the academy could see this scene and envy him for having such a friend. After Chen Pinggan said goodbye to the old teacher, he touched Li Huai's head and said something that Li Huai didn't understand at that time. "I can do this kind of thing, but you can't think that you can do it often." Li Huai said, "Don't worry, I will study hard in the future." Chen Pinggan said, "Whether you study well or not and whether you have the ability to understand are one thing, but the attitude towards studying is, to a large extent, another thing than the achievement of studying. It is often more important on the road of life. So, it is not a bad thing to study hard when you are young. In the future, even if you don't study and don't deal with the books of sages, when you do other things that you like, you will get used to working hard." Li Huai didn't quite understand. As Chen Pinggan walked, he casually drew a line in front of him. For example, this is a line in everyone's road of life. All of our temperament, state of mind, reason, and cognition will involuntarily move closer to this line. Other than the teachers and teachers of the academy, most people will one day move further and further away from reading, books, and sages on the surface. But our attitude towards life and context may have long existed a line. In the future, our life will move forward along this line. Even we don't know about it, but the influence of this line on us will be with us for life. Then Chen Pinggan drew a circle around the front of the line. "I have walked a long road and know many people. I also understand your temperament, so I can plead with the old teacher to let you not follow the curfew tonight and be exempted from punishment. But you can't do it yourself because you are younger than me. You're much younger than me. You can't compete with the rules because you don't know the real rules." Li Huai stared blankly at Chen Pinggan. Suddenly, he pulled a long face and said, "I don't really understand what you're saying. I can only barely remember it." "Chen Pinggan, why do I feel like you're leaving the academy? It sounds like you are saying your last words." The two of them had already walked near Li Huai's school. Chen Pinggan kicked Li Huai's butt and laughed angrily, "Get lost." Li Huai rubbed his butt and walked to the door of the school. He turned his head to look. Chen Pinggan was still standing at the same spot and waved at him. It was always like this. Chen Pinggan returned to Kui Dongshan's courtyard. Lin Shuyi and Xie Xie were cultivating. Once a qi cultivator embarked on the path of cultivation, before becoming an earth immortal of golden core, they would not differentiate between day and night. A cultivator could not help but cut off the mortal world and be pure of heart and few desires. Chen Pinggan sighed softly. He began to practice the heaven and earth pillar and walking upside down in the courtyard. He used a breath of pure vital qi to nourish his internal organs, meridians, and bones. Legend had it that after becoming the seventh golden body of a martial artist, one's qi would be channeled to the ninth level and could reach the perfect state where no qi could enter or exit the nose. When one reached the 10th level of a martial artist, which was the final stage of the level of the old man surnamed Kui, Li and Song Jianqiang, one could truly form a small world of their own, like an ancient god descending to the mortal world. Those who were good at using qi could make the river flow against the current. They could burn the lake and boil the sea. They could also be in the midst of a great plague and remain untainted. That was the principle. Chen Pinggan suddenly remembered the trip to the inverted mountain and the tall woman he met on the street. At that time, Chen Pinggan's eyesight was shallow and he could not see much. Now that he thought about it, she was most likely a 10th level martial artist. Martial artist Dao, heaven and earth as one. Kui Dongshan was not in the courtyard. He appeared at the peak of Mount Donghua. He stood together with Maro Xiaodong. Kui Dongshan said some words that were not very polite. When it comes to teaching and preaching, you are far inferior to Qi Jingchun. You are only mending the walls and windows of the house, but Qi Jingchun is helping the students build houses. It was rare that Maro Xiaodong did not argue with Kui Dongshan. Kui Dongshan said slowly, Zhao Yaro has never had to worry about food and clothing since he was young. He is naturally intelligent and has a gentle temperament. We have to teach him to give up some things and understand the difficulties and hardships of this world. Only then can he truly understand what is in his heart and what is in his hands. Song Jisin seems domineering and sharp, but he is actually inferior and timid. We have to teach him some legalism knowledge similar to Confucianism to strengthen his heart and make him understand the rules clearly. When it comes to governing a country, we have to abandon petty cleverness and obtain great wisdom. We will not deviate too far from Confucianism and will ultimately walk the right path. As for my master, he is used to having nothing. His heart is extremely hard, but he has no one to rely on. He has to learn to pick up some things and then constantly read and understand people. Then, he will use the principles that he constantly ponders as the ballast of a small boat drifting in the sea of bitterness. This is called teaching according to one's aptitude. There is no discrimination in education. Maro Xiaodong finally opened his mouth and said, I do not deny that I am inferior to Qi Jingchun, but this is not a reason why I am inferior to you, Kui Dong. Kui Dongshan laughed and said, compared to someone like me, don't you think you are too shabby? Maro Xiaodong twitched the corner of his mouth and disdained to speak. Kui Dongshan laughed and said, when will you officially enter the upper 5 realms? I will prepare a congratulatory gift for you when the time comes. Maro Xiaodong was unwilling to answer this question. His heart was heavy. Will there be a big problem over at the Great Wall of Sword Qi? The 100 schools of thought are so active now. They are betting on the various dynasties of the 9 great continents. This greatly violates common sense. Why do I feel that? Maro Xiaodong did not continue speaking. Kui Dongshan sighed and said, the whole world feels that the felons resisting the demon race is something that the 9 great continents are used to. It is the responsibility of the sword cultivators. As for the truth and the result, let's wait and see. Maro Xiaodong turned to look at him. Kui Dongshan looked into the distance. Put yourself in their shoes. If you are a remnant of the demon race that left behind the great continent, do you want to return to your roots? If you are a remnant of the felons who are confined to a circle, do you want to turn around and tell the great continent what you have been holding in your heart for countless years? Maro Xiaodong frowned and said, the Great Wall of Sword Qi has always been guarded by the saints of the 3 sects. Kui Dongshan laughed. Not to mention the entire desolate world, even half of it, as long as they are willing to work together and are willing to pay any price, they can take down a great wall of sword qi and swallow a few continents of the great continent. Is it difficult? Maro Xiaodong said, I don't think it is easy. Kui Dongshan did not deny it. He only said, You will know the answer if you read more history books. Maro Xiaodong hesitated for a moment. In the South Swirl continent closest to the inverted hanging mountain, there is a Chen Chunan who can carry the sun and moon on his shoulders. Kui Dongshan said slowly, there are also some people in the history books. If they die early, their names will be passed down through the ages. If they die late, their names will go down in infamy for 10,000 years. Maro Xiaodong was about to say something when Kui Dongshan turned to him and said with a smile, I am talking nonsense here. Are you taking it seriously? Maro Xiaodong said, if it turns out that you are talking nonsense, then I will treat you to a drink. Kui Dongshan laughed. As expected of a scholar who is about to enter the pure jade realm. The higher your cultivation, the more magnanimous you become. Maro Xiaodong looked around. In the vast world, the territory was vast. Naturally, there were wars and chaos in every continent. However, on the whole, it was still like the capital of the Great Sui dynasty. Singing and dancing were peaceful. Children could only read about the rivers of blood flowing through the rivers and the thousands of li of starvation. Every day, the adults would haggle over every ounce of firewood, rice, oil, and salt. The scholars who studied bitterly all thought about becoming field servants in the imperial court and ascending to the emperor's hall in the evening. Many scholars who had already become officials, even if they were already in the large vat of officialdom, things remained the same but people had changed. Occasionally, when they flipped through books in the dead of night, perhaps they would still feel ashamed to face the teachings of those sages and virtuous men. They yearned for those high mountains and bright moonlight, the bright universe. Kui Dongshan looked at the nominal disciple of the sage of literature who he used to look down on. He suddenly stood on tiptoe and patted Maro Xiaodong on the shoulder. Don't worry. In the vast world, there are still people like my master and your junior brother. Besides, there is still some time. For example, Little Treasure Bottle, Li Huai, Lin Shuyi, they will all grow up. By the way, what's the saying? Maro Xiaodong said one of his teacher's famous sayings, the student surpasses the master. Kui Dongshan coughed and said, to tell you the truth, the reason why old Xiu was able to say these words was because of me. I might as well tell you the reason for this. At that time, old Xiu and I were passing by a dye house and met a beautiful young lady. Maro Xiaodong grabbed Kui Dongshan's shoulder and threw him off the peak of Mount Donghua. He scolded, little bastard, are you addicted to talking nonsense? In the wilderness, 3 moons hung in the sky. It was a huge abyss shaped like an ancient well. It was known as the Hall of Martyrs. It was said that this place was once the battlefield site of a great demon ancestor in ancient times. He had a great battle with a young daoist who rode a bull from afar. In this world, the battle was described in a soul-stirring way. Only a handful of demons knew the truth. In fact, the battle was real, but it wasn't between the demon and the young daoist who rode a bull. It was an even more tragic battle from a long time ago. However, at that time, an extremely senior demon had climbed up the well for thousands of years and finally broke free with great difficulty. After going through untold hardships, he climbed out of the well and reached the mouth of the well. Then, the daoist stood on the mouth of the well and gently pressed down with a finger, knocking him back to the bottom of the well. Now, above the 4 walls of this well, there were huge seats arranged in a circle. There were a total of 14 seats, and the seats were uneven. There was a broken mountain that hung upside down like a high platform. There was also a bejeweled jade palace that seemed to be part of the legendary ancient celestial court. There was also a huge corpse floating in the endless void. There was a huge skeleton throne made of white bones. There was a white bone demon that was as white as jade. It was holding a cup of wine, and beneath its feet was a head that it gently twisted. There was a pillar that was thousands of feet tall, carved with ancient runes. It towered in the void, and there was a long scarlet snake coiled around it. Dim dragon pearls slowly rotated. There was nothing on a tattered grey robe that fluttered in the windless air. There was a tall and sturdy figure wearing golden armor and a visor. Golden light constantly flowed out from the gaps of the armor like flowing water. It was like a blazing sun that had been restrained in a deep well. There was a woman wearing an imperial crown and a black dragon robe. She had the head of a human and the body of a flood dragon. Her long tail dragged straight into the abyss. There were countless ethereal women that were the size of rice grains compared to her enormous figure. They held Peeper in their arms, and colorful ribbons lingered around their graceful bodies. There were hundreds of them. The woman was bored. She held her chin with one hand and stretched out 2 fingers with the other, crushing the Peeper women one by one. There was a dayoist in a snow-white dayoist robe whose face could not be seen clearly. He was 3,000 feet tall. Compared to the other neighbors on the other thrones, he still appeared extremely small. However, a crescent moon appeared behind him. There was a burly giant with 3 heads and 6 arms, who was bare-chested and exposed his stomach. He sat cross-legged on a chair made of stacked golden books. On the chair, there was a shocking wound on his chest. It was caused by the sword immortal of the Great Wall of Sword Chi. None of the great demons here had participated in the earth-shattering battle at the Great Wall of Sword Chi. Most of the hidden existences were awakened from their endless slumber. A small number of them had been famous for thousands of years, but they had never cared about the battle at the Great Wall of Sword Chi. They had always chosen to watch coldly from the sidelines. The 2 great demons that had visited the blind old man in the 100,000 mountains were also not qualified to have a seat here. The 14 seats surrounded a hovering stone in the middle. When the figure of an old man slowly appeared in the middle, 2 more ancient great demons hurriedly appeared, as if they absolutely did not dare to be behind the old man. The old man surveyed his surroundings. There was still 1 empty seat, with only a saber there. That seat was the newest to appear in the Abyss Martyr's palace. It was also the 3rd highest throne after the old man. The old man did not say anything. In this desolate world, true experts were revered more than anywhere else. The owner of the saber had secretly fought 2 life-and-death battles with Alliance of the Great Wall of Sword Chi. However, they still called each other brothers and drank together. Once, when he had nothing to do, he went to the 100,000 mountains to help the blind old man move mountains. Second only to the old man was a middle-aged man dressed in a scholarly robe. He sat upright and still. He did not reveal his true form as a demon and appeared as small as a mustard seed. This person's seat was even higher than the sword. Including the scholarly great demon, all the great demons present stood up to show their respect to the old man. The old man said, "There's no need to wait for him. Let's begin the meeting." Only then did the demons slowly take their seats. The old man looked at the scholarly great demon. "Whatever you say next, everyone present will do it. If anyone disagrees, I'll persuade them. If anyone agrees, after the matter." The scholarly great demon added with a smile, "If they agree in public but oppose in private." The old man nodded. "Then I'll talk to them personally." In the desolate world, a youth who looked like a sword-bearing boy followed behind a burly man. The man's clothes were clean and tidy. The youth behind him was dressed in ragged clothes. The youth's eyes were different. In this world, he would be mocked as a bastard. In this barren and vast world filled with miasma, it was a symbol of strength to be able to walk around in human form. This man had fought with our Liang before, and they had also drunk together. The youth's body was tied with a mohist mechanism known as a sword rack. At a glance, when it was filled with swords, the youth's back looked like a peacock spreading its tail. In the vast world, Cao Ci of the Central Divine Continent's Great Duan dynasty was dragged by her friend Liu Yuju to travel the world. Cao Ci never went to the martial temple, only the Confucian temple. Along the way, she killed demons and devils with her bare hands and hammered golden core evil cultivators. Liu Yuju only needed to watch from the side and applaud. Back then, when she passed through the Great Wall of Sword Chi and the inverted hanging mountain, Cao Ci broke through to the 5th realm. When she passed by a small country in the Central Divine Continent, she silently reached the 6th realm just by practicing her fists as usual. Her vast and dense martial arts fate flowed in all directions. A nearby martial temple was on the verge of collapse. The martial arts fate continued to flow like a flood, causing the martial arts fate of the country to grow by countless times. In the blue underworld, a youth covered in wounds and grief climbed up the mountain to beat the heavenly drum. After a moment of silence, A young Daoist priest with a lotus crown on his head appeared beside the youth with a smile and accepted him as a disciple on behalf of his master. A Beko Kekyung building with 5 cities and 12 floors shook from top to bottom. From then on, the Daoist ancestor had a new disciple. In the Aquarius continent, the Great Sui Kingdom's Cliff Academy. Pei Qian and Li Baoping sat on a high branch at the peak of the mountain and looked under the tree together. Chen Pinggan was practicing his fists. 419. 3 days later, Chen Pinggan was leaving the Cliff Academy in the morning. Li Baoping found that Li Huai, Pei Qian, and the others had been sneaking together recently. Even youngest uncle was missing from time to time, which made Li Baoping a little disappointed. One day, Li Baoping came to Kui Dongshan's yard early in the morning to see youngest uncle off. Pei Qian didn't sleep with her yesterday, but borrowed the auspicious symbol and the small silver gourd from her. Li Baoping found that the whole yard was empty. Did youngest uncle sneak away again? Li Baoping turned around and was about to run to the foot of the mountain. But she found Kui Dongshan yawning and walking from a distant path. Li Baoping walked quickly in the same place, as if she could fly out like an arrow at any time. She asked anxiously, "Where is youngest uncle? How long has he been gone?" Kui Dongshan looked confused. "He left a long time ago. Don't you know what happened in the middle of the night last night?" Li Baoping stopped in his tracks and frowned. His face was still round, but his chin was starting to sharpen. Kui Dongshan sighed. Seeing that the little girl was about to burst the dam, he quickly comforted her. "Don't think too much. It must be that my master is afraid to see you like this. It was the same last time. Your youngest uncle had changed into new clothes and boots, but he still didn't go to the academy. I was the only one with him at that time, and he kept looking back at me." Li Baoping sniffled. Kui Dongshan asked tentatively, "How about I accompany you to the lake to relax and talk about my master?" Li Baoping thought for a while and nodded. The two went to the lake. The sky was just beginning to brighten, and there was no one around. If it was in the past, there would be some students of the academy reciting the sage poems here. Today, it was especially quiet. Kui Dongshan led Li Baoping to a high platform by the lake. Kui Dongshan suddenly asked, "Little Baoping, I think your youngest martial uncle left without saying goodbye." "Don't worry. As long as you don't recognize him as your youngest martial uncle, I will accompany you and don't recognize this teacher. Don't you think I'm very loyal?" Li Baoping glared at him and said, "What are you talking about? In this world, there are only youngest martial uncles who don't want Li Baoping. There is no Li Baoping who doesn't want youngest martial uncles." Kui Dongshan pretended to be enlightened and said, "Oh, I see." Kui Dongshan snapped his fingers. All of a sudden, a brilliant golden halo lit up on the small paths around the lake. It was a lightning pool drawn by the immortal flying sword, Jin Sui. At that moment, Kui Dongshan removed a portion of the camouflage. Li Huai suddenly appeared on the small path by the lake in the distance. She saw this guy holding a white deer. Imitating someone, he wore a bamboo hat and a narrow saber with the auspicious symbol hanging from his waist. A small silver gourd swayed around his waist. Li Baoping stared blankly. After walking for a while, Li Huai opened his mouth in a clear voice. "I, Li Huai, have been in closed-door training for 3 days. I finally learned a good martial art. This time I'm going down the mountain to roam the Jianghu. I want to properly experience the abilities of heroes from all over the world." Kui Dongshan snapped his fingers again. Not far from the high platform, 2 figures appeared. Poor Zhu Lian and Sharu, playing the role of bandits. They were violently beating up the 2 weak scholars Yu Lu and Lin Shuyi. Li Huai shouted, "Stop." Zhu Lian blocked Li Huai's path and shouted, "You also have to leave the passage money and hand over the money to buy your life." Li Huai laughed loudly, "Little thief without eyes, you dare to rob me, Hero Li. Today I will roar when I see injustice. If you have the ability, then feel free to come and take it." Zhu Lian floated out a series of small steps, as if he was treading water. His fists lightly landed on Li Huai's chest. Li Huai didn't move, he looked up to the sky and laughed. Zhu Lian looked like he was struck by lightning. His body was like a sieve, he said with a trembling voice. This young hero has such deep internal strength. Then he flew out and twitched twice. He was probably dead. Just like in the Ranger romance novels. Huan Huan Bo. Huan Huan Sheng Ba. Ba Gongxian Xian 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 11. Ya. Lang Wei Ji Jiao Shu Shusha Ru shyly followed and lightly slapped at Li Huai. Li Huai waved his hand from afar and laughed. Scram. Sharu seemed to have been injured by the energy. She spun a few times in the air and fell to the ground in the distance. She raised a hand and pointed at Li Huai. She suppressed the shame and anger in her heart. Just who are you? I have never heard of such an unfathomable expert in Jianghu. Li Huai stretched out a hand and placed it in front of his chest. He imitated the monk's words and said, I've sinned. It's because my martial arts are too high that I couldn't stop myself. Li Huai stopped his movements and came near the high platform. He looked around. Remember, I am Li Huai, the branch leader of Longquan County's headquarters, Donghua Mountain Branch, and the branch leader of the academy. Hero Li, known in Jianghu as the Invincible Dual Fists and the Peerless Dual Fists and Feet. Our branch leader is the current Wulin Jianghu Alliance leader who shook the world and unified the world, Li Baoping. Li Baoping crossed her arms in front of her chest and nodded lightly. Kui Dongshan snapped his fingers. Li Huai, Bai Lu, Zhu Lian, Sharu, and Yu Lu and Lin Shuyi all disappeared. At the same time, Yu Lu and Xie Xie appeared on both sides of the lake. One of them was standing and playing the flute, while the other was sitting and playing the zither. They were like a pair of immortal heroes in Jianghu. The sound of the flute was faint, and the sound of the zither was melodious. It was getting more and more passionate. On the shore of the lake opposite Li Baoping's high platform, after Kui Dongshan smiled slightly, a dark and thin figure appeared in an instant. He ran wildly and used his walking stick to support himself on the ground. He leaped high into the air and pounced into the lake. In the air, he pulled out the bamboo blade and bamboo sword at his waist. His body spun and landed on the ground. He looked very impressive and very domineering. Every time Pei Qian landed on the surface of the lake, a golden flower would appear under his feet. Therefore, he didn't have to worry about falling into the water. Pei Qian first performed the white ape dragging blade style with the bamboo blade. His momentum was as strong as a tiger's. He ran straight in a straight line. After running for more than 100 feet, he shouted loudly towards Kui Dongshan's high platform and slashed down heavily with his saber. Then, with a tap of her toes, she stepped on the golden flower that Kui Dongshan had helped her control. She suddenly twisted her body and placed the bamboo blade back at her waist. After landing, she continued running forward with the crazy fiend sword technique that she had created. In order to be able to beat the wildest dog in the future, Pei Qian felt that she practiced martial arts very diligently. She felt that this unique set of martial arts was unparalleled in the world. Pei Qian practiced this set of sword style to her heart's content. He stood still and put away his bamboo sword. Pei Qian stood on the surface of the lake about 7 or 8 feet away from the high platform. He flipped his wrist and suddenly a small gourd appeared in his hand. He raised it high and said loudly, "There's nothing good in Jianghu except for the wine." "Where's the wine? Come. Who's going to drink the wine of Jianghu with me?" Kui Dongshan laughed heartily. He waved his sleeves and rushed towards Pei Qian. He stretched out his arms and flicked his fingers. While grabbing the small silver gourd, he drew out 2 streams of water essence from the lake to make wine. One lingered around the silver blade strengthening gourd and the other lingered around the gourd in Pei Qian's hand. The 2 of them stood side by side, one big and one small. They both raised their heads to drink wine. Then, Kui Dongshan and Pei Qian seemed to have practiced it countless times. They started to stagger in drunkenness. Then, the 2 of them walked sideways like crabs. They spread their arms and their sleeves billowed like waves. In the end, the 2 of them imitated the little girl in the red dress and walked on the spot. This scene made Li Baoping, who was standing alone on the high platform, smile from ear to ear. Kui Dongshan suddenly sat down and waved his sleeves. Something appeared out of nowhere and started to sing. It was a song about eating stinky tofu that Chen Pinggan and Pei Qian had adapted from a folk song in Longquan County. Kui Dongshan sang loudly, "Waiter, I've read some books and learned a lot of words. I've accumulated a lot of knowledge, but I can't sell it for much." Pei Qian had already put away the gourd in his hand. He stuck out his chest and raised his head high. He walked in circles around Kui Dongshan. "Stinky tofu is delicious, but I can't afford it. There are demons and monsters on the mountain, and water ghosts in the lake and river. I was so scared that I turned around and found that I'd been away from home for many years. I was so scared that I had to eat a piece of stinky tofu to calm myself down. Which family's little girl is from? She smells like orchids. Why is her face covered in tears? Don't you think she's pitiful? Eat stinky tofu. Stinky tofu is as fragrant as orchids. Teacher, what should we do? There's a small paper kite basking in the sun on the branch. Climb the tree and pluck the kite. Go home and eat stinky tofu. Burning incense in front of the grave is like a young immortal, but the bones of his descendants have been in the grave for hundreds of years. Don't you think it's funny?" Kui Dongshan was talking nonsense. Pei Qian was stunned. Anyway, he didn't care anymore. He casually said, "Hey, who's the stinky tofu for? You have your reasons, and I have my fists. Jianghu is so chaotic. When will the grudges end?" Kui Dongshan was still changing the ballad. Pei Qian pretended to be a drunkard again. He swayed left and right. "Stinky tofu goes well with wine. I'm full and not thirsty. It doesn't matter what Jianghu is like. People all say that immortals are good, but I don't think the mountain is free at all." Pei Qian glared at Kui Dongshan, who kept changing the ballad. He also hummed and shouted, "If you continue to do this, I'll be full of stinky tofu." Kui Dongshan didn't embarrass Pei Qian anymore. He stood up and asked, "We've eaten stinky tofu and drunk wine. Where's the sword immortal?" Pei Qian was also surprised. He asked, "Yes, we have the wine. Where's the sword immortal?" They looked at the high platform and said in unison, "Why don't you try shouting?" Li Baoping took a deep breath and said loudly, "Youngest uncle." Kui Dongshan snapped his fingers. Li Huai and the others showed up. Everyone looked at the top of Mount Donghua. Li Baoping also turned to look. A snow-white figure swept over from the top of the mountain. He landed on the lake with great momentum. His golden robe was fluttering. He was like a white-robed immortal standing on the surface of a dark mirror. Chen Pinggan didn't carry the sword immortal on his back. He only had a sword-cultivating gourd hanging on his waist. Chen Pinggan reached out his hand. Kui Dongshan took out a long sword from the object in front of him. He wiped it with 2 fingers and imitated Li Baoping's catchphrase. "Go." The long sword was unsheathed and cut through the sky. Chen Pinggan reached out and held the sword. He drew an arc with the tip of the sword and held it behind his back. He put 2 fingers together in front of him and made a sword gesture. He laughed loudly and said, "People say that the snow is food and the bricks are mirrors. They are fools. I'll go against the current and hit the wall. After drinking all the wine in Jianghu, I know the truth of the world. I have one sword after another, and each sword will be faster. One day, when I use my sword, it will be the best sword in the world." Chen Pinggan began to walk on the lake like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. The sword in his hand moved freely like the wind sweeping autumn leaves. His body turned slightly to the right and his left step landed lightly. He held the sword in his right hand and turned it along with him. He pulled it back slightly to the right and followed the sword with his eyes. Suddenly, his right foot turned into a bow step. The sword drew an arc upward. His eyes were sharp. Immortals lift up their clothes and the sword comes out of their sleeves. Because of the momentum, the sword draws an arc. The fixed style is to look at the sword's tip. There are mountains and rivers on the sword's tip. Chen Pinggan walked with big strides. The long sword was with him. The sword was continuous, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. He suddenly stopped. He shook his wrist and the tip of the sword flicked upward. The tip of the sword was like a white python spitting out its tongue. After the sword left his hand, It flew around Chen Pingan like a little bird. Chen Pingan moved forward with his essence, qi, spirit, and the fist's will. Chen Pingan's last punch landed heavily on the sword's hilt. The flying sword flew in circles in front of Chen Pingan. The sword's light flowed unpredictably like a bright moon on the lake. Chen Pingan stretched out an arm. His 2 fingers accurately touched the flying sword's hilt. He waved his big sleeve and the flying sword flew more than 10 feet away. As Chen Pingan walked slowly, the flying sword followed him and drew circles. From small to big, it shone brightly on the lake. Visiting the water deity temple at night, visiting the city god's pavilion in the day, a small boat in the flood dragon ditch, immortals carrying swords on their backs. People say that reason is the most useless. But I say that the book contains the sword immortals will. Every word has the sword's light. Let the sage see my sword's qi rushing into a bool. Li Baoping clapped her hands hard. Her face was red. Chen Pingan took off the blade strengthening gourd and threw it casually. He reached out his hand to control the sword. The tip of the sword touched the wine gourd. He waved the sword more freely than Pei Qian's crazy sword art. But no matter how he waved the sword, the blade strengthening gourd stopped at the tip of the sword. Chen Pingan did not know that Kui Dongshan had already removed the thunder pool created by the golden sword's qi. Although outsiders could not hear him, many people in the academy could see him controlling the sword. A group of people stood at the gate of the academy. Chen Pingan had already carried the deity of sword and the big bamboo box. Pei Qian had a bag slung over his shoulder. He held the mountain walking staff in his hand and the sword at his waist. Zhu Lian and Shi Ru stood at the side. After Li Huai and Pei Qian whispered to each other for a while and agreed that they would definitely roam the Jianghu together in the future, Li Huai whispered to Chen Pingan, "When you arrive at Longquan County, you must remember to take a look at my house." Chen Pingan nodded and smiled. "No problem." Then he said to Li Baoping, Lin Shuyi, Li Huai, and the others, "You can all go to school. You don't have to see me off. I've already wasted a lot of time. I don't think the teachers want to see me in the future." Li Baoping did not insist on seeing her youngest uncle to the gate of the capital of the Great Sui Kingdom. She nodded. "Be careful, youngest uncle." Chen Pingan rubbed her head. "You don't have to remind me." Li Baoping smiled. Chen Pingan bowed to Maro Xiaodong. Maro Xiaodong nodded and smiled. "Come here often." In the end, it was Kui Dongshan who said he would see Mr. to the end of White Thatch Street. Pei Qian and Baoping Jejie also whispered to each other. Their heads were close together. Finally, Pei Qian beamed with joy. "Great, I got the young branch master." Chen Pingan and Kui Dongshan walked slowly at the front. They walked out of the main street and turned into White Thatch Street. Finally, at the end of White Thatch Street, Kui Dongshan finally stopped and said slowly, "Mister, I don't think the world has become worse than before. There are more and more cultivators on the mountain, and there are more and more people at the foot of the mountain. What do you think?" Chen Pingan nodded. "That should be the case." Kui Dongshan raised his head and looked at the sky. He murmured, "But it's undeniable that the mountain peaks that rise above the earth are like swords pointing straight at the canopy of the sky. Every 100 or 1,000 years, they do appear less and less. So I hope that all our joys and sorrows don't become the pecking outside the chicken coop, the chirping of sparrows in the nest, and the mournful cries of cicadas on the branches." Kui Dongshan pointed to the sky. "Higher up in the sky, there will always be 1 or 2 cries of cranes. It's far from the ground, but it makes people feel sad. After looking up and hearing it, it's hard to forget." Chen Pingan smiled. "I think it's good that you can think this way." Chen Pingan hesitated. "Mister, you haven't read much and your knowledge is shallow. I can't give you an answer for now. But I will think about it. Even if I can't give you an answer in the end, I will tell you. Mister, you can't understand it, but I've stumped you. When that happens, I won't laugh at you." This was probably the first time in Chen Pingan's life that he admitted that he was Kui Dongshan's mister. Kui Dongshan smiled brightly and suddenly bowed deeply. He stood up and said softly, "Flowers bloom on the ridge of the hometown. Mister, you can slowly return home." Chen Pinggan said helplessly, "It's already autumn." Kui Dongshan shook his head vigorously. "I hope Mr.'s state of mind is like spring all year round." For 20, sorry for the long wait. A chapter of 14,000 words. Chen Pinggan was very familiar with the road from the capital of the Great Sui Kingdom back to Longquan County in Dali. He tried his best to choose small paths in the mountains. There was no one around. Other than using the heaven and earth stakes to walk, he would let Zhu Lian help him punch every day. The bigger the fight, the more serious it was. Zhu Lian started at level 6 and finally reached the peak of level 7. The more he fought, the more Pei Qian was worried. If Master did not wear that robe, how much more money would he have to spend on clothes? The first time they sparred, Chen Pinggan called for a halt halfway through the fight. It turned out that his boots were torn, so he had no choice but to take off his boots and fight with Zhu Lian barefoot. After leaving the border of the Great Sui Kingdom, Chen Pinggan changed into a pair of straw sandals. Pei Qian was overjoyed. Then, Chen Pinggan made a pair for her. Little Charcoal could not smile anymore. The straw sandals were sturdy. They were more reliable than ordinary boots when going up and down mountains. However, they still hurt his feet. Fortunately, Chen Pinggan did not insist that Pei Qian wear them all the time. When Pei Qian used a needle to prick the blisters on the soles of his feet, Zhu Lian was making sarcastic remarks. The old and the young were used to fighting with words every day. At that time, Chen Pinggan sat by the stream. He took off his straw sandals and stepped into the water. His thoughts drifted far away. He was not homesick, but compared to his first trip home, there were many more things he missed. The ancestral house in Mud Bottle Alley, the bamboo house in Luopo Mountain, the purchase of the mountain that Wei Pai mentioned, the business of the 2 shops in Dragon Riding Alley, the repair of the clay bodhisattva and the heavenly official statues in the Tomb of the Immortals. There were many things that Chen Pinggan had never thought about before. After returning to the Longquan County, he would first go to the Lake of Letters to see Jiyu Kan. Then, he would go to the Tsai Nation to visit the couple and the old nanny who was good at cooking. He also had to see the Shushui Nation's sword Saint Song Yuxiao. He still owed the old senior a hot pot. Chen Pinggan also wanted to show off to the old senior that his beloved girl also liked him. It was not as scary as the old senior song made it out to be. Kui Dongshan, Lu Tai, and even Liu Qingshan of the Lion Garden. Chen Pinggan naturally yearned for their scholarly elegance, but it was not enough for Chen Pinggan to blindly lean towards them. This was called liking the new but never wearying the old. Therefore, the more he accumulated, the more money he had. Chen Pinggan felt that it was a good habit. Just like his talent for naming, it was one of the few things that could make Chen Pinggan a little proud. Chen Pinggan suddenly turned to Pei Qian and said, "In the future, you and Li Huai can roam the pugilistic world together. You don't have to be too restrained, and you don't have to learn from me." Pei Qian blushed and said, "I want to learn from Master, but I can't do it even if I want to." Zhu Lian smiled and said, "Pei Qian, in the future, I will compile a book of flattery. It will definitely sell well in the pugilistic world. When the time comes, the money that I earn will be split equally with you." Pei Qian said seriously, "You can't go back on your word. We will split the money 50-50. Zhu Lian stretched out his hand and pointed at Pei Qian. "You, in this life, you only care about money. You won't be able to climb out of it." Pei Qian imitated Li Huai, shook his head and made a face. "I won't listen, I won't listen." Tortoise chanting scriptures. Chen Pinggan smiled knowingly. "I heard from Li Huai that the 2 of you have decided to go around searching for treasures in the future." Zhu Lian teased, "Ayo, what a celestial couple. You're so young and you've already decided to be together." Pei Qian said angrily, "I am Li Huai's pugilistic friends. There's no love involved. Old chef, don't talk nonsense here." Then, Pei Qian immediately changed his attitude and said to Chen Pinggan with a smile, "Master, you don't have to worry about me siding with an outsider in the future. I'm not one of those pugilistic women who will faint at the sight of a man in the books. I've dug up all the valuable treasures with Li Huai and made an agreement with him to split them equally. When the time comes, I will definitely put my share into master's pocket. Chen Pinggan dismissed it with a smile. Afterwards, the group of people smoothly walked to the Yellow Ting country's county city. It was located on the banks of the Imperial River. When Chen Pinggan and Kui Dongshan came here together, they saw several sword cultivators crossing the streets on their swords. It was a mess. At that time, Chen Pinggan did not stop them. Based on his own strength at that time, he was unable to do anything and could only watch from the side. As the old saying goes, a small temple has a big evil wind. Not to mention the southern territories of Dali, even the Great Sui Kingdom's borders and Qing Luan country's capital city seemed like even Qi cultivators did not dare to be so unscrupulous. On the other hand, the immortal genealogists and wild cultivators of these small vassal states were very indulgent. Even the common people who were affected by the disaster could only blame their bad luck afterwards. This was because there was nowhere to seek justice. The imperial court was unwilling to intervene as it was a strenuous and unrewarding task. The local government did not dare to intervene. Even if there were chivalrous people who were indignant, they were powerless. In this county city, Kui Dongshan had subdued the little girl in pink in the Cao family's library, who had given birth to her true form as a fire python, and the green-robed child who was acting like a tyrant in the Imperial River Water God's territory. The little girl in pink was a literary spirit that was born from the world's famous essays and popular poems. As for the green-robed child, according to what Wei Pai said in the letter, he seemed to have some connection with Lu Chen. As a result, this Daoist sect leader who was currently in charge of the Beko Keikyang building wanted to bring the green-robed child to the Qingming world. However, the green-robed child did not agree. Lu Chen left behind the golden lotus seed. At the same time, he requested that Chen Pinggan help the green-robed child, a water snake, to walk the river and become a dragon in the North Continent in the future. Chen Pinggan did not object to this. He did not even have much doubt about it. The county city was still bustling. It seemed that the people of the Huang Ting Kingdom did not feel much about the tribute from the Gao family of the Great Sui Kingdom to the Song clan. Their days were still leisurely. However, it was said that the Dali cavalry had been on a southern expedition. One of the cavalry troops had traveled south along the border between the Great Sui Kingdom and the Huang Ting Kingdom. It was not a serious offense, but it did not cause too much of a stir in the imperial court of the Huang Ting Kingdom. As they traveled deep into the hinterland of the Huang Ting Kingdom, they could often hear the discussions of the people in the streets. They were proud of the people of the Dali people for the Dali cavalry's invincibility. They were skeptical about the wise decision of the Huang Ting Kingdom's emperor at the beginning, but now, they were all full of approval and praise. At the same time, the Purple Sun residents of the Huang Ting Kingdom, the Imperial River, the Hansha River, and the Five Peaks became the first to be recognized by the Dali Imperial Court as immortal residences and landscape gods. As dusk approached, Pei Qian was undoubtedly the happiest when they entered the city. Although there was still a long way to go before they reached the Dali border, they were getting closer and closer to the Longquan County. It was as if every step she took was returning home. Recently, she was glowing with a cheerful aura. Zhu Lian did not feel too much. He probably still saw himself as a rootless duckweed, drifting here and there, never landing on the ground. He was just changing the scenery to see. However, Zhu Lian was still curious about the Longquan County, which had once been a small grotto heaven. Especially after learning that there was a limitless Grandmaster in Luopo Mountain, Zhu Lian wanted to see it. Only Sharu was filled with apprehension. Chen Pinggan's intermittent chatter, coupled with Kui Dongshan's description of the Longquan County as a place of crouching tigers and hidden dragons, made Sharu feel that she would be a lamb walking into a tiger's mouth if she brought the remains of an immortal there. In particular, Kui Dongshan deliberately teased that it was not easy to live in the remains of an immortal, which made Sharu even more worried. Chen Pinggan first bought some miscellaneous items when he entered the city, then chose a downtown restaurant, drank a few cups with Zhu Lian, bought 2 jars of wine, and then went to find an inn to stay at. When Chen Pinggan once again walked on the bustling streets of this county, he did not encounter the free and easy sword cultivators who played games in the mortal world. Otherwise, Chen Pinggan would not mind directly punching them out of their flying swords when they wantonly hurt people. As for whether there would be any subsequent disturbances that would implicate a few ancestors of the mountain, Chen Pinggan did not mind. After walking through the inverted mountain and the map of the two continents, one would know about small vassal states like Huangting country. Generally speaking, a Jindan Earth Immortal was already the leader of a country's immortal master and was out of reach. Moreover, if he really encountered a nascent soul cultivator, Chen Pinggan did not dare to say that he could win in a single battle. With Zhu Lian, a martial artist in the remote travel realm, holding the line, and Sharu, who could swallow a nascent soul sword cultivator's natal flying sword unscathed, running away would not be difficult. For example, back then, the group of people stayed in the private residence of the old assistant minister of the Huangting country's Ministry of Revenue. Old Assistant Minister Cheng was a great scholar of Huangting country who was famous in the northern literary world of Aquarius continent. That Chen Pinggan later learned that the old assistant minister had actually traveled the world in the history of Huangting country with different identities and appearances. At that time, the old assistant minister had treated Chen Pinggan and his group with great hospitality when they happened to pass by. There was a large cliff near the elegant residence. It was a scenic spot that was frequented by tourists and the scenery was marvelous. Later on, Kui Dongshan revealed the heavenly secret that the old assistant minister was a descendant of the ancient Shu country that had been in hibernation for a long time. Back then, with the personal recommendation of his student, he had already been recruited by the Dali Imperial Court as the deputy mountain chief of the Lu Academy in Cloud Mountain Forest. As for the old dragon's eldest daughter, she was the founder of the #1 sect in Huangting country, Purple Young Manor. His youngest son was the water god of Hansha River. Among them, the old dragon's eldest daughter was a female Jindan flood dragon. Limited by her own natural endowments, she attempted to break through the bottleneck of the Jindan stage and ascend to the nascent soul realm. Unfortunately, she was still a little short of success. Within 100 years, she could forget about advancing any further. Flood dragons were blessed by the heavens on their path of cultivation. However, after forming their gold core, it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. The 5 greatest fated chances of the Lizhu Grotto heaven back then were the golden carp of Jiao Xian, the prince of the Great Sui Kingdom, the 4-legged snake that refused to stay in Chen Pinggan's ancestral residence no matter what, the fire dragon that transformed into a bracelet and coiled around Wan Xiu's wrist, Zhao Kuang's wooden hornless dragon paperweight that was temporarily dormant, and the loach that Chen Pinggan had personally caught and gifted to Ji Yukan back then. The reason why they were so coveted was that they could ascend to the nascent soul realm without any obstacles. Whoever could raise one of them was equivalent to having a retainer whose combat power was equivalent to that of a Jade Plane realm cultivator. In the Aquarius continent, where there were only a handful of cultivators in the upper 5 realms, which cultivator would not be envious? Moreover, these 5 flood dragons that were very close to the bloodline of a true dragon, once they recognized their master, their souls would be linked to each other, and they would be able to continuously nourish their master's corporeal body. Imperceptibly, it was equivalent to giving their master a sturdy physique equivalent to that of a pure martial artist in the golden body realm. When Chen Pinggan was about to lead the way into an inn, he and Zhu Lian turned their heads to look at the main street. A tall and slender woman with a cold expression came slowly and walked in front of Chen Pinggan and the others. She revealed a smile and said in fluent Dali official language, "Young Master Chen, my father is a good friend of your Dali North Peaks god Wei Pai. He is currently the deputy mountain head of Linlu Academy, and he had once received young Master Chen. Before leaving Huangting country, my father told me that if young Master Chen passes by this place in the future, I must do my best as a host and not neglect you. Not long ago, I received a letter from home from Mount Piercing Cloud, so I have been waiting in the vicinity for a long time. If this snooping has offended young Master Chen, I hope you can forgive me. Here, I sincerely invite young Master Chen to my Purple Sun Palace as a guest for a few days." Chen Pinggan asked, "Since I'm in a hurry, will it bring trouble to Senior if I politely decline Senior's invitation today?" The tall woman, who was the eldest daughter of old Jiao and the founding ancestor of Purple Sun Palace, smiled and said, "Of course not, but I really hope that young Master Chen can stay in Purple Sun Palace for a day or two. The scenery there is not bad, and there are some mountain specialties that can be taken out. If young Master Chen doesn't agree, I won't be scolded by my father and the mountain god. But if young Master Chen is willing to give me face, I will definitely be remembered by my father and Wei Pai. Chen Pinggan hesitated for a moment and nodded with a smile. All right, then shall we trouble Senior for a day or two? The tall woman, who was a descendant of the ancient Shu country's Jiao dragon, took out a small boat that was as small as a woman's finger and threw it on the ground. Mist filled the air, and suddenly, a pocket-sized ship with engraved railings and painted rafters appeared. It was 3 stories high, and could easily carry 40 to 50 people. Fortunately, when she threw this magic treasure, the woman had already waved her sleeves silently, and the pedestrians on the street were gently pulled to the sides of the street. At the same time, she took out a stack of talisman papers of different colors from her sleeves. After she let go, the talisman papers floated to the ground, and slender and beautiful girls appeared. They were dazzling, and it was impossible to recognize that they were just a stack of talisman paper dolls just a moment ago. They were nimble and quickly moved a boarding plank from the ship. The tall woman smiled and said, "Young master, please board the ship." Pei Qian looked at them intently. He felt that if he also had 2 treasures like the ship and the talisman papers in the future, he would have to buy them even if he had to sell his pots and pans. Chen Pinggan patted Pei Qian's head and led him to board the ship together with the tall woman cultivator. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the ship slowly rose into the sky and sailed away with the wind. Its speed was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, it had already traveled dozens of miles. Standing on this immortal ferry that belonged to the ancestors of Xiang Manor, the imperial river that meandered for nearly 1,000 miles was below their feet. Chen Pinggan stood beside the railing, and together with Pei Qian, they looked at the picturesque scenery on the ground. Chen Pinggan couldn't help but think of his hometown, as well as the counties and small towns along the way to Longquan County, and the beautiful mountains and rivers that Chen Pinggan had walked through. He also thought of some people from his hometown. Among his classmates who left the Lizhu heavenly abode with the school's groom, Li Huai and Lin Shuyi eventually followed Chen Pinggan and Li Huai. Between Dong Shuijing and Shi Chuanjia, one chose to stay in his hometown, while the other followed his family and moved to the capital of Dali. Actually, Chen Pinggan had a good impression of them. One had a simple and honest temperament, and it was probably because of their similar backgrounds that made Chen Pinggan feel close to him back then. The other had braided hair and was lively and cute, and he could tell that she was smart and intelligent. Chen Pinggan didn't feel that their choice was wrong. In the depths of Chen Pinggan's heart, he hoped that the mountains and rivers of his hometown would remain the same. Whether it was Dong Shuijing and Shi Chuanjia who stayed in their hometown, or Liu Xianyang, Ji Yukan, and Zhao Yarrow who were already far away from their hometown, their hearts were still filled with the green mountains and rivers of their hometown. Of course, on this journey back home, Chen Pinggan still had to make a trip to the mansion of the female ghost with the beautiful wedding dress hanging high in the wind. He had to tell her some of the words that he had kept in his stomach back then. In the twilight, Dong Shuijing hung up the closed sign for the wonton shop, but he wasn't in a hurry to close the shop's doors. After doing business for a long time, he knew that there would always be some visitors who had made appointments with the shop when they went up the mountain to buy a bowl of wonton. Therefore, even if Dong Shuijing hung up the wooden sign saying closed, he would still wait for about an hour or so. However, Dong Shuijing wouldn't let the 2 newly hired waiters wait with him. When customers came, Dong Shuijing would personally cook. Even if the 2 waiters, who were born in poverty, wanted to share the joys and sorrows with the shopkeeper, Dong Shuijing wouldn't let them. Dong Shuijing's wonton shop became more and more famous. Many rich people in the newly established county city of Longquan invited Dong Shuijing to open 2 more shops in the county city, but Dong Shuijing declined all of them. Other than the wonton shop on the mountainside with the mountain god temple at the top of the mountain, Dong Shuijing had used a large sum of money from selling one of the town's ancestral houses to buy a house half a street in the new county city. Except for one house, he rented out the rest. Dong Shuijing was also one of the first local people to pick up leftovers. Among the neighbors of the 2 ancestral houses, there were many lonely old people who were born and raised in the town. They were stubborn. Even if outsiders offered a sky-high price to buy their ancestral objects, they still wouldn't sell them. They said that they could sleep in a pile of money at night, or that they could take them with them to the next life after they died. The disciples of the immortals on the mountain were patient. Those old guys who might become a pile of bones in the soil in a few years only felt that it was unreasonable, but they didn't dare to force them to buy. They could only go back disappointed with a large sum of money. However, after Dong Shuijing came to visit them, no one knew whether it was because the old people cherished this young man they had watched grow up or because Dong Shuijing had a glib tongue. In short, the old people sold the wonton shop to Dong Shuijing at a price far lower than that of outsiders. Dong Shuijing went to the bun shop on the Oxhorn Mountain several times and made an immeasurable income. Plus the unexpected harvest from his own hard work, Dong Shuijing found Governor Wu, County Magistrate Yuan, and Supervisor Cao, who had visited the wonton shop one after another, and bought many pieces of land silently. Unconsciously, Dong Shuijing had become one of the few rich and powerful families in the new county city of Longquan. Indistinctly, there was a frightening saying, Dong Bancheng, in the mountains of Longquan County. Today, after Dong Shuijing finished chatting with the two young men and left, the shopkeeper, who had grown into a tall young man, stayed in the shop alone and made a bowl of steaming hot wonton for himself as a reward. As dusk fell, autumn became more intense. After eating the wonton, Dong Shuijing cleaned up the bowls and chopsticks and came to the outside of the shop. He glanced at the path leading to the mountain and didn't see any pilgrims, so he planned to close the shop. However, he didn't expect that there were no pilgrims returning home on the mountain. Instead, a young man in a scholar's robe came from the foot of the mountain. Dong Shuijing was familiar with him, so he led him in with a smile, made a bowl of wonton, and served him a pot of homebrewed rice wine. From the beginning to the end, the two deliberately talked in the dialect of Longquan. Dong Shuijing spoke slowly because he was afraid that the other party wouldn't understand. The guest was a weirdo named Gao Xian. He claimed to be a wanderer who came to study at the Dali Academy in the Cloud Mountain Forest. He couldn't speak the official dialect of Dali very well, but he still wanted to learn the dialect of Longquan from Dong Shuijing. After Gao Xian finished eating the wonton, Dong Shuijing poured 2 bowls of rice wine. Water and glutinous rice were the key factors for the rice wine to be mellow. Longquan Prefecture had no shortage of good water, and Dong Shuijing had asked for glutinous rice from the kill supervisor surnamed Cao. The glutinous rice was shipped to Longquan from a land of fish and rice in Dali, and the price was much lower than the market price. As a result, a sizable rice wine brewery had appeared in Longquan Prefecture City. Now, it was already being sold to the capital regions of Dali. Although it wasn't making a lot of money at the moment, its prospects and financial situation were pretty good. The restaurants in the capital regions of Dali had gradually recognized the Longquan rice wine. Coupled with the existence of the Lizhu cave and various rumors about immortals, the wine was even more fragrant. Dong Shuijing had asked County Magistrate Yuan for help in the matter of selling the rice wine. This small profit but quick turnover deal involved Wu Yuan's approval, County Magistrate Yuan's opening of the capital regions, and Supervisor Cao's glutinous rice. Wu Yuan, the prefectural governor, County Magistrate Yuan, and Supervisor Cao. Among the three, Wu Yuan had the highest rank. Although he was only a rank 4 prefectural governor, he wasn't a true feudal official. However, as the youngest prefectural governor of Dali, Wu Yuan was an existence that the Dali imperial court didn't want to underestimate. After all, Wu Yuan's teacher was the imperial tutor of Dali, Kui Dong. It was a pity that after Wu Yuan had been promoted, his reputation was much worse than before he left the capital. It was said that before Longquan was promoted to a prefecture, County Magistrate Wu, who was sent here by the imperial tutor with high hopes, was ostracized by the large clans in those regions. Xinyu clang, 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 clang. He was rebuffed. However, Wu Yuan had a good teacher. Others couldn't be envious of him. However, Wu Yuan was already a big joke in the imperial court of Dali. On the contrary, the latter two, County Magistrate Yuan and Supervisor Cao, were favored by the Dali bureaucracy. It wasn't just that these two young talents were direct descendants of the two great pillars of the state. Both of them were doing well in their respective fields in Longquan Prefecture. County Magistrate Yuan was responsible for the construction of the Immortals' Cave on the Western Mountain. The smooth construction and completion of the Tomb of the Immortals and the Civil and Martial Temple on Laosai Mountain was also due to his efforts. The large clans that stayed in Longquan Prefecture didn't recognize Wu Yuan as the prefectural governor, but were willing to recognize the county magistrate who had an even lower official title. As for the Kill Affairs Supervisory Office where Supervisor Cao worked, on the surface, it was a small yamen that was in charge of the production of imperial porcelain from the Dragon Kill. In reality, it was a secret mission to supervise all the powers in Longquan Prefecture. Yuan and Cao, the two most noble surnames in Dali, were like fire and water. The Dali cavalry was divided into 3 groups when they marched south. Behind the scenes of 2 groups stood the figures of the 2 great pillars of the state. For Dong Shuijing to be able to rope in these 3 people at the same time through an inconspicuous small business, it couldn't be denied that it was a magnificent feat of accidentally. In reality, Dong Shuijing was the one who had come up with the idea for the rice wine business. However, the specific plan, the interlocking steps, was someone else who had given Dong Shuijing advice. Dong Shuijing later asked that person why County Magistrate Yuan and Supervisor Cao, who were descendants of prominent aristocratic families, didn't refuse this small profit. For example, at the end of last year, Dong Shuijing earned 70,000 taels of silver from the 3 families, while Yuan and Cao only earned 140,000 taels of silver in total. Compared to the merchants in the marketplace, it was a huge profit. In the future, the dividends would indeed increase steadily. However, after Dong Shuijing learned about the general properties of the 2 surnames, he really couldn't understand it. That person then told Dong Shuijing that the businesses in the world were divided into big and small, high and low, as well as dirty and clean businesses. Making a lot of money in some businesses that involved killing people was a skill. Making a small amount of money in a clean and small business was also a skill. Moreover, many small businesses, when done to the extreme, would have the opportunity to become a real money-making business, a business that could solidify the foundation of a tycoon for 100 years. In the end, that person took out an ordinary copper coin, placed it on the table, and pushed it towards Dong Shuijing, who was sincerely asking for advice. He said, even the god of wealth in the vast world, the Liu family of the pure snow continent, started their business from the first copper coin. Think about it carefully. That person, who was still holding his sword horizontally behind his back, swaggered away, saying that he was going to the capital of the Great Sui Kingdom. If he was lucky, he might be able to meet the founder of the Shong family. That young-looking old man once won the trust of the world with the Tao integration great magical power of descending a heavenly wood, and was finally recognized by the Sage of Rites. Dong Shuijing thought for a long time before remembering that person ate 2 big bowls of wontons, drank a pot of rice wine, and finally left the shop with a copper coin. However, Dong Shuijing, who was used to haggling over every penny, not only didn't feel that he was losing money, but he even profited. Jiao Xian saw that Dong Shuijing was drinking wine and seemed to be daydreaming. He asked with a smile, "Something on your mind? Why don't you tell me? I can't help you, but I can listen to shopkeeper Dong complain a little." Dong Shuijing shook his head and said jokingly, "I'm just thinking about the future, no complaints. Every day when I return to the manor in the county capital, I'm half dead from exhaustion. After counting the money, I can fall asleep immediately. When I wake up, it's a new day, busy and fulfilling." Jiao Xian sighed, "I really envy you." Dong Shuijing was speechless. He didn't think that Jiao Xian was making a fuss about nothing. Every family had their own problems, and it had nothing to do with money. Dong Shuijing didn't reply and drank a mouthful of his self-brewed rice wine. The wine pots in the wonton shop were all stripped of the Dong family workshop's red paper, or else it would easily cause trouble. This simple shop that was used to cultivate one's temperament quickly became foul. Now, there were still very few people who knew how much wealth Dong Shuijing had in the entire Longquan County, where all kinds of deities and crooks mixed together. After Jiao Xian paid the bill, he said that he wanted to continue climbing the mountain and spend the night in the mountain god temple. Tomorrow, He would watch the sunrise from the top of the mountain. Dong Shuijing handed the shop's key to Jiao Xian and said that if he regretted it, he could stay in the shop. At least it would be a place to shelter from the wind and rain. Jiao Xian rejected the kindness and went up the mountain alone. Dong Shuijing went down the mountain and met Shu Ruo, who should have just returned from the capital of the Great Sui Kingdom. He said that he wanted to have a bowl of wonton to fill his stomach, and then go to the ferry at Oxhorn Mountain to continue his journey to the capital of Dali. Dong Shuijing had to return, opened the door of the shop, and directly made 2 big bowls for this hero of Moism. He didn't take the rice wine as he didn't want to be polite with this person. Dong Shuijing sat opposite him and watched Shu Ruo wolfing down the food. Shu Ruo said vaguely, "Guess who that young man is?" Dong Shuijing didn't think much about it. His relationship with Jiao Xian didn't involve too much profit. Dong Shuijing also liked this kind of interaction. He was born to do business, but business was always not everything in life. However, since Shu Ruo asked this question, and Dong Shuijing wasn't stupid, the answer naturally came to light. The prince of the Great Sui Kingdom of the Jiao family of Guiyang? He came to Dali as a hostage? Shu Ruo nodded. Dong Shuijing hesitated and asked, "Can you not do business with Jiao Xian?" Shu Ruo smiled and said, "Why not? The reason why I said this is that I hope you understand something." Dong Shuijing said seriously, "Please say it, mister." Only at times like this, Dong Shuijing was willing to call Shu Ruo mister. Shu Ruo glanced at the counter of the shop. Dong Shuijing immediately went to get a pot of rice wine and placed it in front of Shu Ruo. Shu Ruo took a sip of the rice wine, which had a lingering aftertaste. When you start a small business, you need to be diligent. When you become big, of course, you still need to be diligent. However, the word information will become more and more important. You need to be good at digging out the details that no one cares about, and the information hidden behind the details. One day, you will be able to use it, and you don't have to hold a grudge against it. Dong Shuijing nodded. Shu Ruo asked again, "What do you think of Wu Yuan, County Magistrate Yuan, Supervisor Cao, and Jiao Xian's temperament?" Dong Shuijing said slowly, "Governor Wu is gentle, County Magistrate Yuan is strict, and Supervisor Cao is romantic. Jiao Xian is elegant." Shu Ruo asked again, "Why so?" Dong Shuijing already had a draft in his mind, so he said without hesitation, "Governor Wu's husband, the imperial tutor Kui Dong, is now showing off his abilities. Governor Wu must be cautious and not get carried away, or else it will easily cause unnecessary jealousy and attacks. The Yuan family has always been cautious. If I remember correctly, the family motto of the Yuan family is to hide wind and gather water. The Cao family has many descendants from the border army, so they are heroic. As a prince of the Great Sui Kingdom, it is inevitable that Jiao Xian is a little disheartened after being stranded here. Even if he is angry, he should at least show it on the surface." Shu Ruo said, "These are correct, but they are still superficial. If you can think of these, so can many people. Therefore, this is not considered information that can make you rich. You need to think deeper and higher, and think about the more far-reaching structure of the court and the trend of the dynasty. It may not be useful for your current business, but once you develop a good habit, it will benefit you for life." Dong Shuijing nodded and said, "I understand." Shu Ruo said with a smile, "I am not a real lone person. What I can teach you is actually very shallow. But you have the talent to go from shallow to deep. In the future, I will see you less and less often. Moreover, I am also information that belongs to you, Dong Shuijing. I am not boasting, but this exclusive information is not small. So in the future, if you encounter any obstacles, you can naturally do business with me. You don't have to be embarrassed." Dong Shuijing grunted. Shu Ruo took out a typing no-incident token. With your current family business, you are not qualified to have this typing no-incident token. However, I have earned a few typing no-incident tokens over the years. It would be a waste to keep them in my hands, so I gave them away. Just take it that I have a unique insight and have taken a liking to you early on. In the future, I will ask for dividends from you. Tomorrow, go to the prefectural governor's office, and after that, the local yamen and the Ministry of Rights will record it. Dong Shuijing did not refuse. He kept the token of peace and carefully put it in his pocket. It was not an exaggeration to say that this token of peace and safety was priceless. In the vast territory of the northern part of the Aquarius continent, countless kings, generals, ministers, genealogical immortal masters, wild cultivators, and gods of the mountains and rivers hoped to have a piece of it. Shu Ruo said teasingly, "I heard that your future father-in-law went to the Tongyi continent. On his way back to the North continent, he appeared in this hometown town. Didn't you take the opportunity to visit him?" Dong Shuijing did not know whether to laugh or cry. He said helplessly, "When I heard the news, Uncle Li had already left the town." Shu Ruo smiled and asked, "Do you want to know how your rival, Lin Shuyi, is doing in the Cliff Academy?" Dong Shuijing nodded and said, "I do." Shu Ruo smiled and did not say anything. Dong Shuijing asked straightforwardly, "How much money?" Shu Ruo stretched out her hand and took a pot of rice wine from behind the counter. She said, "He has not entered the Middle Five State, but he is famous in the capital of the Great Sui Kingdom. If you do not work hard and let Lin Shuyi become an immortal in the Middle Five State, there will be many opportunities for him. He may be able to earn hundreds of thousands of taels of gold and silver with just a flick of his finger. It will be easy for him to catch up." Dong Shuijing hesitated for a moment. "Of course, I do not want to lose to Lin Shuyi, but some things are not about earning more or less." Shu Ruo smiled and stood up with the pot of wine. She said, "It is better to have more than less. Many things that seem to be unsolvable with money are, in the end, because there is not enough money." Dong Shuijing stood up as well. "Sir, why have you not told me the true meaning of being a person of credit? Why have you only taught me the skills of a merchant?" Shu Ruo asked with a smile, "Only?" Dong Shuijing was confused. Shu Ruo did not say anything more and left the shop. Dong Shuijing cleaned up the mess on the table, closed the door of the shop, and went down the mountain to the new city of Longquan County. The young man, who thought he reeked of money, traveled under the moonlight and stars in the night sky. In the Longquan sword sect, the sect master Wan Qiong had taken in more than 10 new registered disciples, which finally made the deserted mountains more lively. There was a lot of discussion about how many people the sage Wan Qiong would take as her inner disciples. The reason why there were these temporary registered disciples in the Longquan sword sect was that the Song clan attached great importance to Wan Qiong, the master of swordsmithing. The imperial court had specially selected 12 young boys and girls with excellent aptitudes, and sent 1,000 elite cavalrymen to escort them all the way to the foot of the mountain where the Longquan sword sect was located. At that time, Wan Qiong was forging swords in the furnace and did not show up. It was a black-robed young man who had just stepped into the Gold Core realm who was in charge of receiving people. After learning that this black-robed young man was a genuine earth immortal of the Gold Core realm, the eyes of the children were filled with passion. In fact, Wan Qiong's title as a sage, the elite armored soldiers of the Dali imperial court as his retinue, and the signboard of the Longquan sword sect, had left a deep impression on these children. The legendary path of cultivation and becoming an immortal on the mountain was actually full of unknowns and dangers. If they could join the Longquan sword sect and be chosen by Sage Wan, and eventually become an inner disciple, it meant that they would at least step into the middle 5 realms of immortals, and their lives would be extremely smooth. Among the 12 people, one of them was identified as an extremely rare innate sword embryo, who would definitely be able to nurture a natal flying sword. The other 3 had the aptitude of an earth immortal, and the other 8 also had the potential to step into the middle 5 realms of cultivation. From this, it could be seen that the Song clan had spared no effort in supporting Wan Qiong. After the 12 people settled down, Wan Qiong only showed up once during the swordsmithing period. After confirming the aptitudes of the 12 people, she handed them over to the other direct disciples. What followed would be a process of continuous selection. For the Longquan sword sect, the aptitude to become a qi cultivator was only a stepping stone. In Wan Qiong's eyes, the aptitude for cultivation and the fundamental disposition were more important. When these people arrived at the mountain, They learned that sect master Wan had an only daughter named Wan Xiu. She liked to wear cyan clothes and tie her hair in a ponytail, which was unforgettable at first glance. Some of the youths were even more excited, but dared not to show their thoughts. These juniors of the Longquan sword sect all liked to address Wan Xiu as eldest senior sister. Wan Xiu, who was amiable to everyone but not particularly close to anyone, tried to persuade them several times, but still could not change their mind, and so they just called her eldest senior sister. As time went by, some of the disciples who had stood out from the crowd, and some who were beginning to feel the strain, found that the eldest senior sister was the strangest existence in the already strange sect. No one had ever seen this eldest senior sister cultivate. Every day, she would either stay in seclusion, or help the sect master forge swords in the forbidden area of the sword furnace. Otherwise, she would wander among the mountains. Apart from the Shunxiu mountain where the sect was located, and a few mountains further away, there were also the Baotu mountain, the Rainbow Cloud Peak, and the Immortal Grass Mountain near the Shunxiu mountain. It was not until later that people learned that these 3 mountains were rented by the sect from someone for 300 years, and did not actually belong to the Longquan sword sect. Apart from traveling alone among the mountains and rivers, Wan Xiu also raised a yard full of old hens and fluffy chicks. Occasionally, she would look at her fellow Gold Core disciple from afar, explain the steps of cultivation in detail, teach them the unique breathing technique of the Longquan sword sect, and split up a set of superior sword technique that was said to have come from the Wind Snow Temple. The eldest senior sister, Wan Xiu, never approached anyone. She held a handkerchief in one hand, on which a small mountain of pastries was placed. She ate slowly, and when she came, she would unwrap the handkerchief and leave immediately after finishing her meal. Some of the smarter disciples would notice that whenever the eldest senior sister left, the second senior brother, who was already an earth immortal, would breathe a sigh of relief. Apart from the eldest senior sister, Wan Xiu, there was also the second senior brother, who was almost half a master, the third senior sister, who lived alone by the Dragon Beard River all year round, and the fourth senior brother, whose surname was Xie and who was born with a pair of long eyebrows. The young senior brother Xie had never been kind to the juniors, but he was the one who was in charge of the discipline of the Longquan sword sect. At first, some of the juniors complained that the fourth senior brother was too harsh and cold, and did not care about the friendship between the juniors. But later, they heard a rumor from a small town, which made them feel like they were struck by lightning. The fourth senior brother Xie, whose ancestral home was in the Peachleaf Alley, was still alive and well. He was a Daoist heavenly lord from the North Continent. An immortal of the 12th realm. Before they ascended the mountain, among the 12, only a few of them knew that the earth immortals in the world were divided into Gold Core and Nascent Soul. As for the realm after Nascent Soul, no one had heard of it, and they mistakenly thought that it was the peak realm of Qi cultivators. After they ascended the mountain, the second senior brother, who was one of the first disciples of Wan Qiong, who was a stern Gold Core earth immortal, gave them a general explanation of the realms of Qi cultivators. Only then did they know that there were the upper 5 realms, the Jade Unadorned Realm, and the Immortal Realm. After that, except for a few ignorant or naive children, the others did not even dare to breathe when they saw the fourth senior brother, who liked to scold others with a straight face. The fourth senior brother would only smile when he was with the eldest senior sister, Wan Xiu. In the entire mountain, he was the only one who did not call her eldest senior sister, but called her sister Xiu. But Wan Xiu did not seem to be very close to this junior brother. This made many youths feel much better in their hearts. Anyway, none of them were favored by the eldest senior sister, so there was no need to feel disappointed. On this day, Wan Qiong showed up again. She only said 2 things, and then returned to the sword furnace. The first thing was that as long as he became a disciple, Wan Qiong would forge a sword for him personally. It should be known that Master Wan was fully deserving of the title of the best swordsmith in the Aquarius continent. Therefore, not to mention the 12 people, except for the fourth senior brother, who still looked indifferent, even the second senior brother and the third senior sister, who had rushed back to the mountain to listen to their master's teachings, could not help but look excited. The second thing was that the Dragon Spring Sword sect had bought a new mountain. Wan Qiong gave a few words of encouragement, saying that when someone reached the nascent soul realm in the future, he would be qualified to hold the opening ceremony in the Dragon Spring Sword sect and occupy a mountain alone. Moreover, as the first cultivator of the sword sect to ascend into the earthly immortal realm, according to the agreement from before, only Dong Jiyu was allowed to make an exception and choose a mountain to be his residence. The Dragon Spring Sword sect would announce this to the world. But Dong Jiyu refused, and begged his master to open a mountain only after he reached the nascent soul realm. Ruan Qiong agreed. Xu Xiaoqiao, who was used to being called the third senior sister by her junior brothers and sisters, went down the mountain again and went to the shop by the Dragon Beard River, where the sword sect thrived. Ruan Xiu went with her for the first time, which made Xu Xiaoqiao feel a little flattered. The fourth senior brother Xieling wanted to follow them, but Ruan Xiu just looked at him without saying a word. Xieling knew the difficulty and stayed on the mountain obediently. When they walked down the mountain, Ruan Xiu asked, "In fact, you are the first disciple of my father. Just because Dong Jiyu reached the core formation realm first, you are called the third senior sister by those people. Do you feel bad?" Xu Xiaoqiao, who was expelled by the Wind Snow Temple, answered honestly, "I feel bad, but I have no objection to Dong Jiyu being the second senior brother." Ruan Xiu did not say anything. Xu Xiaoqiao, who had his thumb cut off when he held the sword, was silent for a moment and asked, "First senior sister, can I really reach the nascent soul realm one day?" Ruan Xiu admitted, "It's difficult. Compared to Dong Jiyu, who will reach the nascent soul realm in 100 years, you have a lot of variables. It's a little easier for you to reach the core formation realm. My father will help you and not favor Dong Jiyu over you. But if you want to reach the nascent soul realm, it will be much more difficult for you than for Dong Jiyu." Xu Xiaoqiao looked sad. For ordinary immortals, becoming a gold core realm cultivator was already a great fortune for them to go back to bed after burning incense for their ancestors' memorial tablets. But in this Dragon Spring Sword sect, in the eyes of Xu Xiaoqiao, who had seen the scenery on the top of the Wind Snow Temple, gold core realm cultivators were far from enough. Unexpectedly, Ruan Xiu added, "As for your junior brother Xieling, he will be the first disciple of the Dragon Spring Sword sect to reach the Jade Unadorned realm. If you are jealous of Xieling now, I believe you will only be more and more jealous for the rest of your life." Xu Xiaoqiao pursed his lips, his steps heavy. Dong Jiyu was the lowliest among the 3 founding disciples of his master Ruan Qiong. He was born as a mountain animal, but now, he had become the second senior brother and an earth immortal in the Dragon Spring Sword sect, who was respected by everyone. Xieling was born and raised in the small town. He was the youngest and had never suffered any hardship. However, he was the one with the most fortune. Not only was his family's ancestor a Daoist heavenly lord, but he was also able to get a Daoist sect leader, who had a high status, to personally give him an exquisite pagoda that was comparable to a divine weapon. Xu Xiaoqiao was the only one who had the toughest life, the most diligent in cultivation, and the most uneven Dao. Ruan Xiu broke a twig on the side of the mountain road, casually held it in her hand, and said slowly, "You think comparisons are odious, don't you?" Xu Xiaoqiao's eyes were red. Ruan Xiu suddenly said with a smile, "Even though you might not be as good as Xieling and Dong Jiyu, even when your golden body decays and you die of old age, I still like you a little more. But it seems that this is useless for your cultivation." Xu Xiaoqiao turned his head and wiped the corners of his eyes with the back of his hand, then turned to Ruan Xiu and said with a smile, "Eldest senior sister, thank you." Ruan Xiu stopped and nodded. "Thank me? Then remember to bring me some pastries next time you go up the mountain. You know the shop in Dragon Riding Alley." Xu Xiaoqiao was dazed for a moment, then smiled like a flower. "My eldest senior sister." Ruan Xiu also smiled. She only sent Xu Xiaoqiao to the foot of the mountain. Under the archway of the Dragon Spring Sword sect, which was given by Emperor Dali, or more precisely, the former emperor, Xu Xiaoqiao said goodbye to Ruan Xiu, then stepped on his flying sword and flew away. In the Dragon Spring County, this was the treatment that only the disciples of the Dragon Spring Sword sect could enjoy. If it were other earth immortals who dared to fly in the sky, Ruan Qiong wouldn't care about the temperament of a saint. The first few groups of Dali cultivators who came to test the waters, and the later sword cultivator Cao Jun, had all experienced Ruan Qiong's rules, and were either killed or injured. Ruan Xiao stood at the foot of the mountain, looking up at the plaque. Her father didn't like the addition of the two words Dragon Spring to the Dragon Spring sword sect. Xu Xiaoqiao and the other two founding disciples knew it very well. Her father hoped that one of the three could remove the two words Dragon Spring in the future and only stand at the peak of the mountains of the Aquarius continent as sword sect. At that time, that person would be the next sect master. Ruan Xiao thought she could understand her father's not in his heart. But every time her father privately asked her to put more effort into cultivation, she agreed, but her mind was full of pastries and bamboo shoot stew. This made Ruan Xiao feel a little guilty. She then put away the thought and decided not to ask her father if she should change the meals of her junior brothers and sisters, or if she could add more meat dishes to their meals. Her poor junior brothers and sisters didn't have the luck to eat such delicious food. She was indeed not good enough as the eldest senior sister that even she didn't want to admit. Ruan Xiao was full of regret and turned back to climb the mountain. Ruan Qiong quietly left Shenxiu Mountain and came to the governor's office in Longquan County. The governor, Wu Yuan, had been waiting for a long time. He didn't exchange any pleasantries with Saint Ruan Qiong and directly told her about an official matter. Within the borders of Dali, some mountain forces that were likely supported by other countries were getting restless. Especially since the beginning of spring this year, there were 3 major conflicts. Among them, 7 people were killed, and the imperial court was enraged. After Ruan Qiong learned about the details of the conflict and the wishes of the Dali imperial court, she thought for a moment. I will let Xiuxiu, Dong Jiyu, and Xu Xiaoqiao come forward and listen to the person in charge of this matter from the Dali imperial court. Wu Yuan was obviously a little surprised and troubled. Miss Xiuxiu is also leaving Longquan County. In fact, Ruan Qiong and the Song clan had long had a secret agreement. The duties and rewards of both parties were clearly written in black and white. But all these years, it was the Dali imperial court who gave and never took. Even if this time Longquan sword sect worked for the Dali imperial court according to the agreement, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights had already explained in the secret letter sent by the flying sword that as long as Saint Ruan was willing to send Dong Jiyu, an earth immortal of Jindan realm, it would be enough to show his sincerity. He must not ask too much of Longquan sword sect. Of course, Wu Yuan didn't dare to make the decision on her own. So when she learned that Ruan Xiao was also leaving the mountain, Wu Yuan felt that it was inappropriate. Ruan Qiong should know why Wu Yuan and the Dali imperial court felt troubled. She smiled and said, "Don't worry, I will tell Xiuxiu not to get involved as much as possible this time. And even if there is any accident, I will not vent my anger on Dali." Wu Yuan still did not dare to agree without authorization. Ruan Qiong said so, but he did not dare to take it seriously. The world was complicated. If there was a slight mistake, the relationship between the Dali imperial court and Longquan sword sect would be damaged. Once the Song clan's efforts were wasted, in the whole Dali, only Mr. Kui Dong could bear it. So Wu Yuan did not hesitate and said that he must report to the Ministry of Rights. Ruan Qiong nodded and said, "Yes, Your Excellency, please give me an answer as soon as possible." Then Ruan Qiong asked, "I want to choose a few people from the remnant Lu felons as registered disciples of sword sect. You can report it to the imperial court and see if they agree. In case of conflict with those groups of stubborn felons, you can be mentally prepared." Wu Yuan smiled bitterly and said, "Okay." After talking about business, Ruan Qiong came and went like the wind, without any delay. Governor Wu was left with a frown on his face. He was mulling over how he should tell the imperial court about these two matters. In the hands of the imperial tutor Kui Dong, the Dali imperial court built a very secret underground organization. All the related personnel were called stubborn felons. Every time they were ordered to leave the capital, they were in a group of 3. One was a Kintiangian, one was a physiognomist, and one was a yin-yang warlock. They were responsible for searching for all the good materials suitable for cultivation for Dali. Once chosen by the stubborn felons, even if they had been selected by the Qi trainers but had not been brought up to the mountain, they had to make way for the stubborn felons. This was probably the origin of the name of the stubborn felons. After Kui Dong became the imperial tutor and Dali flourished, There were many fights in history because of this matter. It was just that after several times, the immortal genealogist of Dali and Yamazawa Wild stopped fighting because the embroidered tiger always supported the stubborn felons to the end. In the mansion of a Yuanian cultivator, an old Jindan cultivator had been testing a young man at the foot of the mountain for 6 years, concentrating on carving the unpolished jade and preparing to accept him as a direct disciple to inherit his legacy. In the end, a group of stubborn felons found that the young man was a good seedling. The old Jindan cultivator met the unreasonable stubborn felons and was so angry that he gnashed his teeth. The old Jindan cultivator was even willing to pay a large amount of immortal money, but the stubborn felons insisted on taking the young man away. The two sides argued endlessly and finally triggered a fierce battle. 2 of the stubborn felons were killed on the spot, and the last one escaped. What the old Jindan cultivator did was reasonable, and it was enough to give face to the Dali imperial court. Moreover, the mountain where the old Jindan cultivator lived was one of the few immortal caves in Dali. But in the end, it was still surrounded by a total of 6,000 Dali cavalry, nearly 100 martial secretaries, hundreds of extremely expensive and rare mohist mechanisms, and more than 100 chi trainers and pure martial artists recruited by the Ministry of Justice. It was called a martial arts show. The battle was fierce and Dali even sent out Dali, the god of North Mountain. In the end, the largest immortal sect on the northern border of Dali was beaten to the point that half of its mountain was cut off. Its vitality was greatly damaged, and it became a second-rate force at the bottom. Among them, the Yuanian cultivator died in the battle, and the old Jindan cultivator was beheaded by a Dali military general. Then, a swordsman was asked to carry the dried head, which died with grievances, and spread it to many mountains on the border. After that, the immortals on the mountains in Dali became much more restrained. Even some arrogant forces that had long attached themselves to the Dali imperial court began to give instructions to their direct disciples. It was said that after the battle ended, the imperial tutor Shohu, who rarely left the capital, appeared on the top of that mountain. But he did not kill the remaining rebels on the mountain. He only asked someone to set up a stone tablet, saying that it would be useful in the future. Today, the stone tablet on the mountain peak was still blank without any words. It was unknown whether the imperial tutor had forgotten about this old matter, or it was not the right time. On the top of a mountain where immortal caves had taken root for many years in the northern border of Dali, there was an old man in a Confucian robe who had just climbed the mountain. He stood next to a blank stone tablet with no words carved on it. He stretched out his hand and pressed on the stone tablet, turning his head to the south. There was only the old man on the top of the mountain, without anyone accompanying him. All the people who had experienced the bloody battle of that year. The older generation of the immortal sects were gathered in an area not too far from the top of the mountain, trembling with fear. As for the new young disciples, they were strictly ordered not to leave their houses. Whoever dared to move without permission would be directly broken on the longevity bridge and thrown to the foot of the mountain. All the elders of the sects in the north of Dali, who used to be incomparably aloof, looked at each other at this moment. They could see the fear and helplessness in each other's eyes. They were afraid that the imperial tutor of Dali would suddenly give an order to settle accounts after the autumn, and eliminate the roots of the mountain that had just regained some vitality with great difficulty. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.